Is everybody's mic working? Shall we start, bring the meeting to order? Could we have roll call, please?
Newton,
Here.
Swift,
Here.
Green,
Here.
Ackerman,
Here.
Gonzalez Parver,
Here.
Kierline, absent, and Chair Fragoso.
Here. Okay, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or recommendations to change our proposed agenda for the night? Not hearing any, we will move forward with...
Motion to approve the agenda?
Oh, that's right.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Whoa. Agenda approved, and now we can move forward with public comments on non-agenda items. That's if you have anything to say that is not an item on tonight's agenda, please come forward, give us your name, address if you don't mind, and give us your comment. And not seeing any, we'll move on to the consent calendar, of which we have no items, so we'll zoom right into our public hearings. I like how this meeting is going. 70 Manzanita Road, application number 17-1, request for a modification for conditional use permit to change the design of a portion of a rear roof line of a previously approved project. If we could have that staff report.
Thank you. This is a modification of an existing use permit that the Planning Commission approved on February 16th of this year. And just to recap what the original project involved, and it was a extension of the first floor of the rear of the residence, locating an office in an area that contained a deck and extending a little bit out and relocating a hallway and a bathroom inside the residence on that first story floor. The modification is to change the style of the roof in an approximately 50 square foot section of the addition, and they would like to change from a flat style roof to a shed style roof and add 3 skylights to that roof addition. The revised roof, it's located in the rear of the residence. It's not visible from Manzanita Road. It wouldn't affect views from neighboring properties. It's in keeping with the roof line of the existing residence, and the addition of the skylights would improve light and aesthetics in the residence. The planning staff believes that the modification is consistent with those findings made by the Planning Commission and their original approval of the application in February. So with that, we recommend that you conduct a public hearing and adopt resolution number 17-27, setting forth the findings and conditions for the project modification and approval.
Thank you, Michelle. Good staff report. Are there any questions of staff before we open the public hearing?
I do. So this came before us before. And when we revisit something like this, like the conditional use permit, with the staff report, we attached the other draft resolution from the prior meeting, but we changed things in that resolution at that point in time. So is it possible, if we revisit an application for a change, that we can have the signed resolution attached? So that would reflect some of the changes that were incorporated into that resolution, because the draft resolution we have for tonight is the same and doesn't reflect what we did previously. Okay. And then also my other question, the general question is, last time we probably made changes to the staff report with code sites and things like that. And those aren't reflected either. So my general question was, when we make changes in a meeting to the staff report to correct some of those things, how do those get memorialized or changed, or so that when we come back, they're there?
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Normally, we could do something like underline the changes in the report and the findings, certainly in the conditions, to indicate that those, to the original staff report, there were changes, and that those would be brought up as an attachment with those changes shown.
And then having the approved resolution attached versus the original draft.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, a couple of things. Probably my fault we don't have a signed resolution because I'd been out of town or busy and hadn't gotten in to sign those. But could staff clarify for me what the changes are that Commissioner Swift is referring to?
I can maybe
It
help.
slipped my mind.
I can maybe help with that on this one. One of the things we talked about previously was if the applicant needed, they were hoping to save the fruit tree, but the original resolution had a condition that if they needed to take the fruit tree out and replace it, they'd replace it with a native tree. So we had a discussion at the last meeting that there was no reason why, if they're taking out a fruit tree, they couldn't replace it with another fruit tree. So we added that into the resolution. So that was kind of one of the ones that hit me when I was reviewing this.
Any other
On this was, is there a replacement tree? That was, there's still apparently an issue there, whether there's a replacement tree, and that's basically the question I have on the project. I mean, it looks good to me otherwise.
I'm sorry, so your question is whether or not they have to replace the tree?
Or is there a plan to replace the tree? That's the question.
I got the impression that they weren't sure until they get under construction whether they're going to have to take it out or not. So they want to try to save it, but they won't know till they actually start doing the work whether that's going to be possible or not. So I don't think they've chosen a tree yet.
Okay.
Am I
but there-
right about that?
we could check with the applicant.
I guess I would have a procedural question then. If we, given that what we're considering is just a change to the roof line and the addition of the skylights, would that be sort of the limit of what we would be considering tonight and not going back and reconsidering? Although I definitely agree with Commissioner Swift's comments that we should make sure we carry forward what we already did decide with regard to the rest of the project, but we aren't really in a position tonight to reconsider any of the rest of it, just the roof line, right?
Well, I don't, so this reso doesn't eliminate your conditions from the original reso. So, I mean, the condition that it can't, that the tree should be replaced and can be replaced with a fruit tree is still in place. Your adoption of this reso doesn't eliminate that. But I don't think, for one thing, the applicant wasn't able to make it, so she's not here to ask. But their intention is to try to keep the tree, right, and only replace it
Yeah,
if they have to.
I don't think we were saying they needed to replace it,
Right.
but if they did replace it, it could be a fruit tree, not strictly
Right.
limited to a native tree, right?
Right.
But anyway, I don't know whether we're in a position to reconsider that tonight, even if we wanted to. We're just considering the roof modification.
I mean, I think you can, if there's something, they reopened it by modifying their
Okay,
original approval.
all right,
but,
that was my
yeah.
question, thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, it brings up an interesting question because in theory, somebody could take their vesting, which they would get after the expiration of an appeal period, and then come back and try to nibble away at a condition, and then kind of sequentially go through whatever conditions they had concerns with to try to modify that. So I think Linda's correct in that technically, legally, they reopened the entirety of the project. Now, as a practical matter, where we're talking about a very inconsequential change, it probably wouldn't be good form to come back and say, you know, there's something I wish I got last time, and then make that type of a change. But because this is a new application or an amended application that's going before the board, it's subject to appeal. If it goes to the council, you know, those type of deliberations could take place. So technically, yes. Generally speaking, minor changes, you're just looking at the change. But it's something that we would track if somebody were trying to sort of change their project in an incremental basis and sort of bank their approval.
But essentially, what I hear you saying is that prior conditions hold, even though the resolution was not technically correct. And so any items that were discussed and approved in a prior resolution would still hold, unless, as you say, since there is an opening here, if the commission was really champing at the bit to open up something other.
Yes, and this also brings up Commissioner Swift's comment about what exactly changes were made. And of course, there's always an effort to reflect a signed resolution when we bring something back, just to be very clear on what the finalized project is. But typically, yes, what we're doing is reflecting, and I think the conditions show that, is the same conditions with the modifications.
I want to make sure, so the resolution that got signed had your condition in it about it's possible to replace with a fruit tree.
So we did sign it, we just don't
You
have
signed
the
that.
signed version
The
here.
breakdown was when staff was in a hurry, we just printed out the original reso and didn't go to our reso book and pull out the signed one, which was an oversight on our part.
But we'll
So-
address that when we get to the resolution tonight, to go back and
Yeah,
and
if you
deal
want,
with
if you
that.
feel better reinserting those and, you know, the things that you got in the first one, that's perfectly fine, yeah.
Well, I think the idea was to attach the signed one. We don't need to change the text of tonight's.
If we ever have one come back that's already been approved, we got the message that we should make sure we get the signed one that has your changes in it attached, along with the staff report that was changed, yeah.
We don't get too many of these coming back, as I recall. And
And one further clarification is we do have a modified resolution here that reflects the change regarding the fruit tree. So,
was that the only change then?
yeah.
Okay,
I will make sure
let
that-
that go. You guys can check on that.
Yeah.
I just was wondering if there was anything else that really popped up.
It's a very good point of clarification, and one which we will make sure we catch next time.
I'm sure, Cindy, you,
Well, the other question that I had before we get to the resolution and that aspect of it, and if the applicants aren't here, I was just curious why the change to the roof line. So I don't know if staff,
is there
Has any
anyone
information
here
on that?
from the applicant to address the item? Okay.
The applicant was unable to attend the meeting today, but it's my understanding it's an aesthetic preference, that this was, they wanted to add skylights, that this was aesthetically more pleasing.
I think it's a design that makes some sense. I could see that. If the applicant isn't here, I suppose we can still open the public hearing to see if the public has any comments on this item. Really, it would be only the roof modification to this project. Everything else has been approved. So we'll open the public hearing if anyone has a comment. I don't see anybody jumping up, so I guess that's a no. Direction from the commission.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to clarify for Cindy. It does talk about additional light. So in the discussion, it talks about the reasons they modified. And one of the reasons was to get more light into the space, which I think is valid.
Yeah, that's essentially what I was observing as well, that the substantial change really is the addition of the skylights, which I think sounds like a reasonable thing. And I'm not sure whether the reason for the change of the actual type of roof may have had something to do with how skylights can be integrated with it, but in any case, I don't see a problem with that either. So my inclination from what I've read and heard so far is that this sounds like a project we would approve the modification to.
Are you willing to make a motion to that effect? If there's no other comments?
Before we do that, can we just make sure that this reflects what the original one did? So we make the corrections on this resolution so we're consistent?
How would you like to go about that?
Well, can I jump in? I was just thinking if you have a addition that you're attaching the original one to this one, that there's no question.
So staff, how does that work when we've got the two resolutions?
So the one phrase or a few words I've seen that is different, yeah, is under, well, the numbering's a little different on the resolution here before you tonight, under miscellaneous conditions, which is on page 4, where it talks about the tree. Third line down after "and plant a native tree species," it should say "or a replacement fruit tree." So that was what I found.
Right, and just for consistency, because I know it's difficult when we go back and try and track these, I would like the resolution to reflect what the original one did. And then the other part of that is, I think on page 2, the first whereas, I think the date on that should be June 1st, 2017, not July 1st for the plans.
Well, those were,
That's the date of the plan.
hold on.
Because that's referencing the plans we have today, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it should say June 1st.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I'll move to approve with the changes referenced by Commissioner Swift.
I'll second that.
Point of clarification, and what I would simply request is that the motion also say, with the modifications to conditions directed by the commission at their original, whatever the date of that original approval hearing. And that way, if we need to make some changes to what you have in the resolution before you, we'll make sure you get those changes and get those in the document that Norma signs.
Okay, I'll start again. I'll move to approve Resolution 1727 of the Fairfax Planning Commission approving a roof modification to a conditional use permit to add an office and relocate a bathroom and hallway at 70 Manzanita Road with the changes discussed and approved by the commission here tonight, and with any other changes that are necessary based on the previous approval of the original use permit.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. There is, of course, a 10-day appeal period for the applicant.
So we usually do include rates. I think this time we just didn't do because we thought it was such a
Don't worry, it won't happen again.
Next item on our agenda is 107 Willow Avenue, application 17-29, request for a design review permit and conditional front rear setback variance for a 50% remodel and expansion of a single-family residence, resulting in relocation of the residential structure out of the side yard setback. If we could
Yep.
have that staff report, please.
Yeah, so the existing house doesn't maintain the required 5-foot side yard setback, and this project will, they need to work on the foundation, so they're going to lift it up, move it out of the side yard setback, so it maintains a 6-foot side yard setback. They're going to raise it up to increase the height in the lower area that's currently unimproved, it's not living space. So they're going to remodel and expand the house in its new conforming location, and it will increase the residence from a 744 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom residence to a 2,034 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom residence with a 546 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom accessory dwelling unit. The project complies with all the setback regulations, except there is a small portion of the lower floor that will project into the combined front and rear setback, and the existing garage doesn't maintain the required rear setback. So the project requires the following discretionary permits: a combined front and rear setback variance, and a design review permit. And based on staff's ability to recommend findings for approval for that project, we're recommending that you approve Resolution 1728, which sets forth recommended findings and conditions for the project approval. I just want to remind you that the second unit does comply with state law, and so that is not part of your approval here tonight. So.
Thank you for that clarification. Also, a good staff report. It was a little tricky with the raising and the moving of it, but good. Any questions of staff before we bring up the applicant and open the public hearing?
I was not totally clear on what the driveway looks like now. So there must be a way to get a car back to that existing garage in the back?
Yeah, you might ask the applicant to address that a little more. I remember that it's just kind of dirt, I think. I don't think it's very defined right now, or it might have been paved, but it's broken up, but I would double check that with them.
Okay.
I walked out there and I honestly can't remember.
And the improvement the applicant can confirm would be, it says crushed road base, but that would be a permeable driveway,
Surface,
which is
right. And the
excellent
only thing that our Public Works Department requires is that the portion in the public right-of-way be concrete. Then it can change to the permeable surface.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a question about the window we'll get to later on. I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff?
I just want to note for the record that on page 2 of the resolution, one of the problems we have here is creating precedent. So condition, on A, combined front rear setback variance findings, one of the findings is frankly a little disturbing in that it says the new construction will occur within the footprint of the existing house. That's great. And attached decks, and that's all good. Bringing the structure into compliance. Therefore, okay, so the problem is in B, actually, okay. So the problem is that we have been granted variances to the project into the required combined setbacks, and we've been doing it since the 70s. And I'm just pointing this out, that continuing to give a little on these setback issues, and I'm not saying we won't here either, sets a precedent for a long period of time that's really hard for us to back out of. And so we need to be very careful. I'm just saying, staff, we need to be really careful in approving it. Now, this project I like because it's actually improving the setback situation. The house is improving. We're adding living space. We've got a ADU, and so I'm very favorable to this project. But I think we need to be stop creating precedent if we don't want to have it be sort of binding as it is here.
Can I ask a question? Or, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you know-
I understand what you're saying, and we do review these carefully, and we have recommended denial, and that's why there's a public hearing, and we do evaluate them. This isn't projecting beyond the, if they were bumping out to the front and, going outside the deck, we might not have recommended approval, but that's why you ultimately have the final vote. So, and if you feel the finding needs beefing up, I would welcome any additional verbiage you might put in there.
No, I think it's fine. I just want to avoid using our history of giving on precedents as a reason why now we're doing it again. And it just points out, audience, everybody, listen up on this. We need to be a little more careful about creating precedents, because they can come back to sort of bite you later.
So I hear what you're saying, so maybe it would have been better if we said something like, the construction does not result in a house that's out of character with the surrounding houses,
Yeah,
Yeah.
rather than saying, well, we've been doing this since the 70s, therefore
rather
we'll
than
continue.
referencing the granting of
Referencing.
past variances. Just point out that this exception doesn't result in a house that gets any closer to the front property line than the other structures in the neighborhood or something like that. Is that what you're?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay,
that's the
better.
thought.
I got it.
That's the thought, yeah, thank you.
I believe it does say that on page 1 of the reso.
No, but I understand what he's saying.
Yes.
He's objecting to the actual reference to, we've historically granted them, we should tie it just to this specific addition and not make that past granting of variance historical reference. Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so I had some comments on the staff report. So page 5, first paragraph, I think the code reference should be 17020-030 under design review. Permit. Sorry.
What do you think it should be, 17 point?
020.030. This one here.
Okay.
And then on page 6, we talk about the public sidewalk. Under Fairfax Public Works Department. And I had just a general question on that, because that sort of comes up. I've heard that discussed in the downtown area. Do we have design criteria for sidewalks so that if we had two applications side by side and they had to put sidewalks in, the sidewalks would
Yeah,
look the same? On a
you mean that they're like concrete gray color would match?
Yeah, that kind of thing.
I know, we refer people to the Marin County regulations, and I would defer to our planning director. Does Marin County get involved with the coloring of the gray concrete? I've never seen anything like that.
My understanding is it's very difficult to match from batch to batch. So it's a real challenge. Usually they're pretty happy if they hit grade.
Well, what about composition? Are there requirements for the composition of the sidewalk versus the color?
So the only place that comes up is like in the downtown core, and then, Public Works does get involved, and if it's connecting up with some kind of colorized concrete, they're going to require them to do that. It's not, I don't know that it's written down anywhere, but the Public Works Department has the authority to say, hey, it's textured concrete, we're not going to allow you to just go in and pour a swath of gray, right? Yeah.
Okay. So we're doing an accessory dwelling unit. So when does this get counted towards our housing number? Is it once it's built?
I believe it's once it's built,
Okay,
yeah, and finalled,
okay. And then we capture that
right.
somewhere once we
When it
issue
gets
the
its
final?
occupancy permit.
Okay.
It's not with issuance of a building permit, but with occupancy?
I believe it's occupancy because a lot can happen during construction. You know, people change their minds, people's relatives move, and, you know, all kinds of stuff happens, so, yeah.
And then my last question was just on a clarification on the parking. So the staff report talks about 4 parking spaces. The design review addendum, attachment B, talks about 3. So I just kind of wanted to
Yeah, I
get
will
clarification on that, and that may go back to maybe a question I may have of the
Okay.
applicant for the existing garage that looks like it's 2 spots or 2, whether it's used in that way.
Okay, so the single-family home requires 3 parking spaces, but because they're putting in an accessory dwelling unit, there's an additional 1 required. So that's where they get the 4. A lot of houses will only need 2 because there will be parking allowed on the, you're allowed to park in the, put your guest space in the public right-of-way along the property frontage, but this side of Willow is marked no parking. So that's how they get.
Right, but I was just looking at the design review, the attachment B, where I think it referenced 3 parking spaces, so I just wanted,
That's something that they fill out, and I think they probably were just thinking the required spaces for the single-family home, since the second unit isn't really under review here, but you can ask them to clarify why they wrote 3.
That's an interesting question about when the housing numbers, the RENA numbers, I assume you're referring to. I think that I would understand that to be that the RENA numbers were saying what the town needed to zone for, which we did. And now we're, thank goodness, on an 8-year cycle. So it'll be 8 years before we have to consider that again. And at that time, it will support our case that, because we zoned, part of our way of meeting those numbers was that we said historically at that point, we had, it looked like an average of 2 second units being legalized and built per year. And so it was counted 2 per year, and that was 16 in our number right there. And so this is, the way I think this will count to our numbers is that sometime before the end of the 8 years, this will presumably be finished, and that will be one more that goes to bolster that, that assertion that 2 per year was a reasonable average. But it's, they aren't actually counting the numbers per se. At this point, it'll just be when we, if and when, if this
Yeah, they'll
whole
ask us how
cycle
many have been
continues,
created.
which maybe it won't.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that went to my question as to when we consider this a unit, and that's when it's occupied.
I would assume so, but it'll only really matter at the end of the 8-year cycle, so it should be occupied by that time. But yeah.
I just have a question. Linda, you just said, or actually I have 2 questions, but you just said that this has an accessory dwelling unit, but it's not being reviewed for the accessory dwelling unit because that's a ministerial, I'm assuming?
Right. So
Okay.
you're reviewing the 50% remodel of the whole entire structure.
Right,
Which
okay.
includes the creation of this unit, but you don't have, in other words, you don't have the purview to say no to that accessory unit.
Okay,
Because state
got it.
law says you have to approve it
Okay.
at a ministerial level.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by nature of adding this, or as a result of adding this accessory dwelling unit, we're changing the exterior, and so it's, I guess, you know, we don't have to comment on the accessory dwelling unit, we're just commenting on how the building is
The increase in
affected.
square footage and
Okay.
the exterior changes and the
Okay.
parking and.
All right, question number 2, back to what Commissioner Green said about setting precedent. I'm in total agreement with that. I wanted to make sure I understood that the variances that we're granting, you know, for the setbacks, they're actually improving, they have 3 setbacks right now that don't comply. They're improving one, but it's probably, I'm assuming, not feasible. We can ask the applicant. It's probably not feasible to move the building to the back or to the front, well, to the back, because it looks like we don't comply anyway.
Yes, and if they move it to the back, they really eliminate their private backyard. It would start getting close to that garage,
Okay.
you know, so.
Okay, so I just want to make sure they are making an improvement on one setback that is in
Yes,
noncompliance.
and they're not encroaching into any of the minimum required setbacks.
Okay, okay, thanks.
So the combined setbacks are often very difficult
Yeah.
for almost 80 to 90% of the homes in town to meet because they're so large. So,
Okay. All right, thank you.
And also they're improving the sidewalk, which is a major improvement on top of additional off-street parking. I have a weird question, I guess, looking at page 5 of the reso, item 11 has flummoxed me, and it says, conditions placed upon the project by outside agencies, the town engineer or other Fairfax department may be eliminated or amended with the written approval of the agency, the town engineer or other department, to the planning and building services. Who is the other agency? Would it be either one of the outside agencies?
yeah, it could be any of them. So what was happening is,
This is a new clause, isn't it?
no, it was put in by the Planning Commission, actually, because what was happening is the different agencies were putting conditions on the projects. They were getting into your resolutions, and then at the building permit stage, the fire department would decide if someone decided to propose alternative materials, they would eliminate the requirement for a sprinkler system, and we were having to bring things back to you because it was in your resolution. We put those kind of in as a courtesy. These agencies can require these things at the building permit stage anyway, but we like to give applicants a heads up front so they know what the cost is going to be. But the Planning Commission, I'm pretty sure I'm right about that the Planning Commission added that to eliminate this problem that we were running into.
I agree with what you said. I'm just not so sure that this paragraph
I think it needs
clearly
amending.
states that.
Maybe
I
we
don't know,
say, maybe we say
if
the
one of the
written,
attorneys in our group didn't pick up on that, maybe it isn't a problem.
maybe it should say with the written approval of the agency that placed the condition on the project. Would that make you feel better?
Does that mean that they would have to come back to us for written approval? I
No,
don't
it's
necessarily want
it's just
that.
clarifying that if a condition is going to be waived, the letter has to come from the agency that placed the condition on the project.
Okay, so
Is that,
if the planning commission issues a condition on a project about stormwater, and Marin Municipal or the fire department change that in somehow because they have the right to do so, they're the ones who call the shots in terms of fire and stormwater and that type of thing, right? These outside agencies.
right, but they couldn't change a condition that you specifically put on the project. They can only change the conditions that they placed on the project.
That they place. See,
Right.
that's not necessarily clear
Clear.
to me. I see what you're saying, but this doesn't say that exactly.
Conditions placed upon the project by outside agencies, the town
That is
engineer
conditions placed not by planning commission, but by outside agencies.
may be eliminated or amended with the written approval of the agency or
The agency
department
that
that
placed the
placed the condition on
conditions?
the project,
That clears.
that placed that condition.
That's a clarification. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
So if it's the planning commission, they would have to,
They can't,
they have to come back to us?
yeah, they can't come in and change your
It
conditions.
requires another public hearing,
Right.
another planning commission item?
Right.
But isn't it likely to be something we can't override anyway, if it's police or fire or public
Well,
work?
you guys don't usually get involved with other agencies' conditions, but what I thought I heard you say is that if you, so let's say a neighbor indicates there's some kind of a drainage issue, and so you ask someone, you require someone to put in, I don't know, or a dissipation area or something. The fire department couldn't come in and eliminate your condition. Only you can change your condition. This is only giving the agencies the ability to change their own conditions. And, right.
Chair, this is a global question that's beyond the scope of this meeting, and will play into some of my comments later on in this meeting in my report. But it really asks the question whether indeed maybe these should be conditions or rather standards. Since they're imposed by outside agencies, changed by outside agencies, by putting them in the rubric of conditions of approval, it raises the question of whether somebody disagrees with those. They could be arguing, gee, I would like this group to change those conditions, et cetera. So again, this is well beyond the scope of any particular item before this commission, but I know that there are ways to address that so that it sort of keeps their comments, their requirements in their agency, and it could be just referenced. So there's ways to look at that.
I'm happy to let staff take a look at that, but it just seemed a little bit confusing to me, just not clear. And that is my only question of staff. Any other commissioner questions? If not, we can open the public hearing. Is the applicant here to make any comments? Would you like to step forward? Please state your name and address for the record if you don't mind.
Oh, God, talk. My name's Henry Taylor. I'm the project architect, and the owners are here, Kelly Harvard and Ryan Geeson. The staff report's very detailed and complete, and I think you've raised a few issues that I can respond to if you'd like. I would just add a couple of things. Obviously, we're moving the house to meet the current codes, but it's also at the pleasure of the neighbor to the north, the 111 Willow, who is pleased that this, moving the house is improving their condition. They're also quite close to the property line. There are very few windows on that side of the northern neighbor, and the one window that's to the rear, the rear portion of the yard, we're not, by raising this house and adding the additions that we're doing, we're not really affecting their view corridor, which is something we're careful to honor. Two other points. One is, as far as the sidewalk goes, there is a sidewalk to the property to the south, and the only condition there is that we're going to, of course, line up with the sidewalk and make sure there's not a step there or anything like that. So that's a practical condition, but in terms of any kind of future sidewalks that you might be approving, obviously that would be something the town engineer would be concerned about. Color-wise, I would imagine that it's going to look pretty much the same in a couple of years. There are no sidewalks to the north of this, and I'm not sure there will ever be, because it's just because of the contours of the land and so forth. But of course, we're putting in a sidewalk. The other point that I'd like to call your attention to is on page 4. The commission has the option this is near the bottom where it says the 28 square foot window on the north side of the residence in the stairway shall be opaque. I'm assuming that means translucent, not totally opaque. The commission has the option here of requiring that, or our request would be that that we have the option of having that be a clear window as well. That window is not located in any kind of a view situation from the neighbor to the north, and we'd like to at least have that option. I mean, we might end up, putting some translucent effects on that window maybe partially or something like that, but we'd like to have the option, if you would agree to that, to dealing with that window ourselves. That's really the only window that's on that level that's facing the north. The other windows on the lower floor are really not seen from the north because we're at a lower elevation. I would think, I'm inclined now to sort of field questions from you if you have them.
Okay, any questions for the applicant?
So a question on that garage in the back with the 2 garage doors.
Right.
Is that used for parking now, or is that storage, or?
It's not used for parking now. And I should mention that from it was probably my error not to recognize we needed 4 parking spaces. We're really counting one covered parking space in that garage, because as a practical matter, with the additions to the rear of the house, right, you'd have to have a lawnmower to get into that second space. So it's really counted as one space with as the covered requirement. The other 3 spaces, we're adding parking, of course, to allow that whoever's coming into the second unit, or for that matter, for the main residence, has clear passage to, get their car out onto the street. So that's why it's widened. The parking is widened the way it is.
Excuse me, so then the 4th parking space is adjacent to the rear garage?
No, the 4th parking space, I think, would be in tandem to one of the cars that's shown to be on the site plan there. I've shown
On the double
Correct.
The double driveway now, but that's for 2 cars to park and then one in tandem with those 2.
Correct, and then
Okay.
the 4th one would be the garage.
In the garage.
Correct.
I have a question about the window with the opaque finish.
Sure.
We're trying to locate it on the plans. Which way is north on the plans?
It's up,
Okay,
yeah.
so up. So we're looking at. And the specific window is on the 2nd floor?
Well, it's halfway, it's on the stair level, so it's on the landing level of the stairs, so it's halfway between the first level and the second.
Okay. It's a,
There's actually a window there now that's being replaced, that's currently on the 2nd floor.
But there's 2 other windows on that same side up there, right?
That's correct.
So that would be, you'd still have 3 windows up there.
That's right.
And the large,
Well, the 2 windows that are there now are existing. They're in, well, there's one in the bathroom, 2 in the front bedroom. They're not changing. So the one that's being added is the stairwell window.
and can I ask, what is on the opposite side of the proposed window?
The stairwell window? It's their entryway. They have, it looks like a garage, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a remodeled garage that's out in front, so I think that appears to be living space. And then right to the immediate north of where that window is kind of the entryway into their house.
Linda, how do we, I mean, I understand.
Yeah, can I say?
Thank you.
I don't know what I was thinking. I'm not that concerned about this window. That's why in the staff report I said, if the commission is concerned, you can require that it be an obscured window. But it does just look into the entry to the neighbor's house and the yard. I don't know why I then put it in the resolution. So if you're not concerned about it and the neighbor isn't concerned about it, I don't have a problem with you eliminating that from the resolution.
No, I don't have a problem with the window, but I was wondering if the neighbor knew that this much bigger window was going in the place of the smaller window that's there now.
Well, they received a notice. I honestly don't know if they came and looked at the plans. Did you show them to them? So,
No, they've seen the story poles. Apparently not looked at the plan.
I'm just trying to figure out if there's a way to approve this.
Actually,
With
we
the-
do have 2 letters before us by neighbors at 110 Willow and at 99 Willow. Did you see those?
What's the house number next door that that window would face?
It's 111, right?
Yeah.
111.
Yeah, it's 111. The two letters are from the residence directly to the south and to the east.
But to just confirm what I thought I heard you say, the other property that would be faced by the window in question would be 111 window.
Correct.
Willow to the north, and
Correct.
that house does not really have a lot of windows along the side facing the subject property.
I'm not aware of
correct?
any except for the one to the rear of the property that's well beyond the
This is 111.
the addition to this house.
Yeah, 111 is there.
They did,
Yeah. but
they
that's
did,
not looking-
they did receive a notice, and they do live there, so.
Between all
Kelly
those
and
rows.
Ryan,
Real close.
Kelly and Ryan have a real good relationship with their neighbor at 111, and they're very aware of what's being planned here. So if there's an issue with that window from the neighbor's point of view, I think that could get sorted out. It's not a it's not a point of disagreement at this point. And of course, windows are a two-way deal, so, we don't want to be looking out at something that doesn't work for them any more than they would not want to have.
And it's also a stair landing, so it's not an area where someone really would spend very much time, yeah.
It would just be nice, I guess the request from our part would be that we'd have the option of being able to treat that window in a way that sort of works for both neighbors, but not necessarily being kind of hemmed into a specific. I took issue with the word opaque, because opaque is, you can't see through it at all. It's translucent, I think, is the word that wants to be.
That's not what I meant, so.
Right.
Anyway.
So would you like to remove it altogether or change it to translucent?
I think, see if there's anyone from 111 to express a concern about it. If there isn't, they did receive a notice, they saw the story poles, and if they're not here, then I would just eliminate it.
Well,
Yeah,
in any case, did you plan to have just a regular, flat glass window there, or did you have any idea what you were planning to do there?
I don't think we really didn't get that far. I suspect that I'm always kind of the approach that when the window's framed out, you sort of say, well, we really would like to protect some of this, or if there's no issue there, it'd be nice to have that northern light on that side. It is a stairwell, and I'd like to have stairwells lit as much as possible. We're not doing any skylights in the house, so I'd just like to have that option of being able to have clear glass.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah, I understand, I think, what the picture is. And just a suggestion, something that we've done in our house, actually, where we have a window that a little bit faces a neighbor's yard. We have, just inside the window, we have a hanging, something we got at the Fairfax Festival, a nice piece of stained glass that just hangs on a couple of
Right.
chains from the top and looks really nice, and
Right.
that really,
No, that's a
without
great-
changing the window in any permanent or structural way, you've got that.
No, I think that's a great idea, and that's, again, it just goes back to sort of having the option of a few different, ways of treating the window.
I actually don't have any concerns with the window. I think it's a wonderful way architecturally to let light into the space. And I don't see it as a problem. The front entry of 111 seems to have a lot of trees and a big gate at front. I just don't think I would be concerned living there with a window like that. So I would vote to eliminate the requirement that it be opaque. Maybe just ask you to go talk to your neighbor and see
Sure.
what, stand there and wave at them, and then,
Right.
do some weird thing and see if they get back to you about that. Actually, Actually, Mr. Taylor, I wanted to tell you that I really enjoyed your plans.
Oh, thank
I
you.
think you've done a very nice job with them. I like the way you have the site plans, and then you have some elevations along the side on the same page. So it made it really easy to review the design that you're proposing and get a feel, and the photographs also helped. I was also particularly impressed that we never get the stormwater plans, and you have some very interesting drainage and erosion control plans that I really appreciated seeing. So thank you for that. One question I have is that you're doing a good amount of work. I'm wondering, I'm too close to that. I'm wondering if you've included a tankless water heater and if that would be an option.
Definitely would, and I suspect that's what we will do.
I didn't see it here.
Well, there's
but-
a little mechanical space underneath the stair landing, the rear stair landing, and that would have the both the furnace and the hot water heater. But the contractor and I have, and the owners actually have talked about doing a tankless, and I think that's the way to go.
It saves 50 gallons of water
Right.
heating up every time you want to take
Absolutely.
a quick shower, and you get it going and you have hot water until the cows come home, until
Yeah.
you turn it too far to cold, and then it's cold forever. Thank
No,
you, I would
that's
really
a good
appreciate
suggestion.
that.
I try to incorporate that into where it's practical and possible.
I'd almost like to see that a requirement, but
So
I'll take your word for it.
hard to make it a requirement because the technology is changing so fast, because there's options like
That's true, there are other
heat
options.
pump water heater
A
is
heat
is
pump
another
would
option now.
also be-
So,
A heat
but
pump
anyway,
would also work.
something efficient. If I may, I have a question regarding what's the status of the gray water, the possibility of a gray water system?
I saw that in the staff report. It's certainly an option that we're going to look at, and if that's something that's, well, I suspect it's not a requirement, but it's certainly something we're going to look at. I mean, we're really, repiping and redoing much of this house, so the opportunity is there to set up a gray water system. I'd love to do that. Something
I thought a 50% requirement triggered the gray water system be installed.
Fair enough.
I think the requirement, I believe, is that under that condition, if it's practical.
Yeah.
So it becomes the question of whether you've got the space to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I could say the same thing about solar. Have you considered solar? I mean, looking at the pictures, which, by the way, thank you. One picture is worth 1,000 words. Even if you go see the property, your pictures are interesting.
Oh, good.
If you have, it looks like you don't have any trees above the house, so
It's
just
a slam dunk kind of roof for a solar setup. And at the very least, what we do, and I do this consistently in all the houses, is set up, circuitry for, for in the attic for setting up a solar system. That's certainly a consideration as well. And I'm kind of surprised that's not an option or not a requirement at this point, but it's certainly something that all my clients in these.
We're trying to
as
get
well.
there, I think.
well, thank you for saying that. Staff, you heard that. Thank you.
It
Okay,
would,
very
it would save you oodles of money in the long term.
And I guess while we're on the subject, make all your light bulbs LEDs, and then you'll have a really nice, efficient house. You could get 0 electric bill.
Right.
Any other questions of the applicant? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Taylor.
You're very welcome.
Well, I don't have any further questions, and I like this project.
We need to hear from any other members of the public.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Newton. We'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone here wanting to talk about this project? Nobody's jumping up. We do have a couple of letters from the neighbors, so with that, we'll close the public hearing and then bring it back for discussion.
Okay, well, we do have some neighbor letters, and One of them actually says, you know, great design, the roof is only going up a few feet, will not obstruct our view, and they're looking forward to have Ryan and Kelly as neighbors. So, you know, with that attitude, I mean, I think this project is a great project. It raises the house, it gets it out of the setback issue as much as you can, creates an accessory dwelling unit for the town, and of course for you to rent and save some money. And I'm kind of ready to make a motion to approve unless there are other comments. It's just me, of course.
Yeah, I would just add that it adds parking and improves access to the garage. And the driveway is apparently already permeable, but it will remain permeable and be a lot more durable during the rainy season. So I just see and improving the sidewalks, as Commissioner Green said. So I see a lot of advantages to the project.
I'd be happy to approve projects like this any month.
I just wanted to say everything that they said. I think it's a great improvement on the site, and it's a big undertaking, so onward and forward, or upward and forward. Good luck. I think it's great, and you're adding an accessory dwelling unit, which is wonderful for Fairfax.
Do we have a motion? A comment?
I'll move to approve, find the number of the resolution. Resolution 1728 of the Fairfax Planning Commission approving application 1729 for a design review permit and combined front rear setback variance for 107 Willow Avenue, with the deletion of the reference to the window of the interior stairway being
Condition
opaque.
11, eliminate condition 11.
Actually, it's
it's
condition
12.
Oh, is it 12? Okay, 12.
And we'll renumber 13
Oh,
as
11's the
number
one you
12.
modified. Okay.
Okay, I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. There is a 10-day appeal period in case the person in front of that window comes back to you. And we'd very much appreciate your working on those sustainable features for your house and for the town. And while you're at it, go deep green. Thank you. For staff, this also has that number 11 that we discussed with the last item that you guys will take a look at.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that too.
Our next project is 64 Cypress Drive. The eastern portion of an assessor's parcel number designated as Lot 56 of the subdivision map number 1 of the Cascades. It's apparently a double lot that is not merged. If we could have that staff report, please.
Okay. Yeah, so I went into an explanation of why these two parcels weren't merged. They were never merged because you couldn't merge a parcel that was developed with a structure for which a building permit was issued, which the barn did have a building permit, so that's why they're standalone parcels. And just a little bit of an explanation about the address number. The address of the barn remodel, should you approve it, will be 64 Cypress. The owner lives in the existing house at 68 Cypress. And I understand that I interchanged them at some point throughout the staff report, so I just want to make sure. The application is for a barn conversion to create a house that will be designated 64. And so the project encompasses the remodeling and expanding of an existing barn into an 803 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, single-family residence, and will include the construction of a 240 40 square foot single car garage and driveway. The project complies with all the setback, height, lot coverage, and floor area ratio regulations for the RS6 zone. It requires a use permit only because the legally created lot is only 50 feet wide, and the new regulations adopted in 1973 increased the minimum lot width to 60 feet. It also requires design review because it is a 50% remodel of the existing structure. We are able to recommend findings for approval to both those discretionary permits to the Planning Commission, and so we're recommending that you adopt the project, approve application 17-31 by adopting our draft resolution 1729, which sets forth the recommended findings and recommended conditions for the project approval. And that would conclude our report.
Thank you, Linda. Questions of staff?
Yeah, what is the current status of having the new construction mimic the board and batten look that exists now? I'm not clear on what the current situation is with that.
Oh, you mean with the house at 68? Or you mean having the garage match the barn?
Right, having the garage match the barn. You're mentioning it's board and
You're going to
batten.
have to ask the applicant that. I just felt that it should match if it could, and I put that in the staff report, but you know, it is a prefab structure, and so while I read the website, it seemed like there was some leeway. They didn't specifically state that they would be willing to, you know, to do board and batten, so you'll need to ask them that.
Also, it is separated by a lot of space and a swimming pool,
Yeah.
and 68 does not have that same siding, so in a way, I didn't find it to be a problem. But,
Yeah, that's why I said if they couldn't do it, you know, it was not an earth-shaking issue, but maybe it's just because I like the board and batten, and then you find it throughout Fairfax, and it's kind of old Fairfax, so.
other questions of staff?
Okay, I always have them. So page 1 of the staff report, we're doing a design review permit plus a use permit. Okay, so that wasn't there. On the background, the lot, the first sentence of the background on page 2, I think it should be lot 56, not 26. The first paragraph under background.
Right on the
Yeah,
first
I'm reading
line.
it. Yes, it is 56, not 26.
Page 3, under use permit, that first paragraph, the code's 17.080, not 1717.
Yep, got it.
So on the plans A0.00 talk about a bed, in the barn, a bedroom, a loft, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. So I just wanted to be clear that that loft is a second bedroom, so it's really considered a bedroom. So we're 2 bedrooms, a kitchenette, and a bathroom.
It has a closet, and per the building code, it constitutes a bedroom. Yeah, and they're showing a bed in it. Yeah.
So this, 68 Cypress came to us in the fall under a different applicant. And it was, and I just wanted to clarify this. So during that application, and they weren't, with the barn, they weren't putting in utilities and that type of thing, but one of the fire department's concerns was that the barn and shed structure extended beyond the 150-foot apparatus access area. And those applicants would have to have provided an on-site hydrant or some alternative method. Now, I assume that for that application, and they were remodeling the house at 68, they maybe have taken the house back further and enlarged the house, and obviously the barn itself didn't have any utilities, so I just wanted to be clear that there wasn't any
No,
additional.
I checked with them, and the reason they were concerned with that one is if you remember, the house was very long and it stretched over the entire site and actually blocked access to the barn, but this is going to have all its own water and everything, so they don't have the same concerns that they had about that large house that was being proposed.
Did that other house, was that one also sprinklered? Because this
remember.
one will be sprinklered.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm sure it must
That
have
might-
had to be, because it was during the time when it's out of, it's in the WUI zone, and, yeah.
But this one, there isn't anything with the existing house that's being done. It's just the barn that's being converted. So, and this may be a question for the applicant. I just wanted to see if the driveway was permeable.
You should ask them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the sidewalk requirement. So the sidewalk's going to go the whole length of 68? And-
No, Public Works corrected me on that. It can only, they can only require it along the frontage of this parcel. They don't have the ability to extend it.
Have to look at the language. I'm not sure the language in here is clear to that. It could be. I just don't remember.
Well, you know that, yeah, you can clear it up, or that's one of those conditions that they draw it on their construction plans, and the Public Works Department
Okay.
reviews it again, and
Okay.
It does say along the entire property frontage, so it would be the property in question.
project property.
And then my last question on this is the driveway with a 19 feet requirement, but I didn't see that necessarily
Yeah, if that didn't.
in the
get-
resolution, I
If that didn't
think.
get into the resolution, it
We'll look at
needs
that
to.
then, all right.
It needs to, because. And they can comply, and I spoke with them, and it was the architect, you know, a lot of towns, their depth requirement is 18 feet, and it was just a oversight. And they can move it back a foot, yeah.
Open the public hearing?
No, I'm just curious, though, the reason that you can't combine the lots is because there's already an existing structure that was permitted, which is the barn. Just for my information, if they had demolished that barn, say 5 years ago, and there was nothing there now, would they have the option to merge the?
Anyone can always choose to merge, but they would still have structures that there were permits issued for, the swimming pool and, you know, there's other structures out there, they would have to take everything out.
Okay, so
yeah.
pool counts even though it's
It's a
underground?
structure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's rebar and poured concrete, and, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, the question, though, was about a statutory merger, right? This was, the town was not able to do a statutory merger when they did a number of others around town because of the existing permitted
Correct,
structures, yeah.
correct.
The owner could merge them, but I don't see why they would want to necessarily. Is the applicant here? Would you like to come up and state your name and address and make any comments or answer any of the questions that you've heard up here?
Yeah, my name's Ingrid Schoenlink, and I'm the architect on this. And this is Neil, owner. And yeah, well, we were just talking about the sidewalk issue. I don't know if we want to jump to that, but the client is willing to put the sidewalk through in front of 68 as well as 64, so that's something. And then talking about the fire department, I think with the previous design, the house was so big that they had to go around the lot, and now they can go straight back to the barn, which is the right dimension for the fire department. So Other than that, it's a simple project, and, yeah.
It does seem to be a very nice design. It should be a great addition. I'm wondering, some of the same questions we had for the last applicant, if you're willing to consider a tankless water heater or one of the newer sustainable models. That would be wonderful for you and the town, and I think we may be getting to a point where we'll require those, hopefully, we'll see. And then I think it greatly improves the parking and the sidewalk, so I really appreciate that. And then the last thing would be gray water. I don't know what your requirements are with Marin Municipal, but at a, is this a 50%? At a 50% remodel, you would have some gray water requirement. So hopefully that will work out for you.
And they do have their own well on the site as well.
No questions, no comments. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate your coming tonight. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this project? While the public hearing is open, but not seeing anyone, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back for discussion with the commission.
Well, I love this barn. I mean, wow, this would be an awesome place to live. There were a couple, just one misnumbered paragraph in the resolution I saw. There's no paragraph 5, which means you just have to renumber everything
yes,
after
thank you.
that.
That's one of my favorite things to do.
And then paragraph 11, which you'll eventually renumber to paragraph 10, includes that same language about the conditions placed by outside agencies.
That's
So we should
confusing.
make the
Got
same
it.
change there that we made with the last one.
Okay.
Condition 12 about matching the siding. It says effort made to match, but it is not a requirement, and I don't feel strongly that it should be a requirement, if anyone has comments on that.
My comment on that aspect is, if staff isn't that concerned about it, it should at least be the same color, the same paint. You know, it should match, and maybe, you know, nobody would notice. Since we don't have any public comment, nobody seems to be concerned. The only thing I would do is add a condition. I'm not sure if it's 14 or 13 with the numbering change, but that all parking spaces will be 19 feet in length. That's the only condition I would propose to add, if that's, you know, that's no problem, right?
You could stick that in the missing number 5.
Good idea, yes. Don't have to go back and renumber.
We just saved 5 minutes of staff time.
Probably more than that.
And then number 8 on page 3 of the resolution should reference Cypress Drive, not Willow.
Another terrific project. Is there, do I hear a motion?
Well,
Can
I
I
just,
just, sorry, can I clarify? It looked like you might be heading to eliminating the matching the siding condition, and, oh, leave it in, okay.
Requirement.
But maybe we could even add, you know, the paint shall be the same color to match the rest of the project. And it isn't a condition, it's just like sort of a feasibility thing, if it's feasible to do it. I mean, I know how you could do it, but I'm not gonna.
And they may already have that on the plans themselves, too.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think it's a great project, and this is a lovely street, so whoever gets to live in, and you know, I guess it would be like an accessory dwelling unit if it were part of, you know, the other property, but more dwellings in Fairfax is great, so good luck. It's great.
Yeah, I like a lot of things, again, about this project. The addition of a nice, really nice living unit, a small living unit, which is, I love. Removing the wood stove and keeping the vegetation cleared. It's already been cleared well, but those are safety improvements. The smoke detectors and sprinklers will be safety improvements. And the hardy plank siding is a fire-resistant material, so that's good. And actually increasing the parking and installing sidewalks. So there's, again, a lot to be said for this. And again, as other commissioners have said, just to run down the list, insulation, great time to insulate the walls and the ceiling. You're never going to want to do it later, so do it now. And LED lighting, heat pump, heating and water heater, if you choose that, or a tankless water heater, but the heat pump allows you to go onto our renewable electricity. And that could be a really low footprint and really, really sweet dwelling. So thank you for the application.
I'll just add my usual is if you could consider at least installing some solar-ready circuitry. Overall, this project is great. It's taking a real eyesore that I've seen in town before and turning it into a beautiful living space. So it's a great project. Thank you.
I object to it being called an eyesore. It's just a beautiful barn. I just have a quick question that, one of the things that Bruce was talking about. So because of the size of this dwelling, does it automatically, is it considered affordable or not?
I don't think so. You know, we don't have any real way to ensure affordability. And any two-bedroom house in Marin, I don't think is really going to be considered affordable.
I was just thinking there was a size that had a correlation
Well,
with
when we
consider-
adopted our original second unit ordinance, they determined that they felt that units that were 700 square feet or less were going to be affordable just by, because of the small size. Unfortunately, I know that one-bedroom apartments are going for quite a bit of money, so I don't know if you could just really state that it's going to be affordable.
Do we have a motion?
I'd be happy to make a motion, if I can get all the numbers straight, to approve as written, but with the renumbering and with the change that was, the addition that was suggested.
Also, remember, we have a use permit and a variance for the parking that should be included in your motion.
Yeah, so approve resolution number 1729 for the use permit and the parking variance for 64 Cypress Drive modification to the barn.
I second the motion.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. You do have a 10-day appeal period in case someone out there is crazy and wants to appeal this beautiful project, basically. So we'll leave it at that. Go. The next item is 2020 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, Assessor's Parcel 001-183-116 in our highway commercial zone. Conversion of a retail bicycle sales and repair shop into a restaurant, bike repair, and sales and warehouse. Staff report, please.
So this business is combining 3 different types of uses, all 3 of which are permitted in the highway commercial zone. The reason it's before you is because it's going to be combined into one business. Our original review, we were a little concerned that it might generate enough traffic to make it subject to the traffic impact permit process, but the applicant provided an analysis from a traffic company, and our town engineer reviewed it and agreed with their determination that it would not raise the traffic, wouldn't generate enough traffic to make this subject to a traffic impact permit process. It complies with all the parking regulations for the town. The hours aren't unusually long, and we were able to make recommended findings, so we're recommending that you approve the project. We did include language in our resolution that if it should become wildly popular and reach the level that it is subject to the traffic permit process, that they would have to go through the permit process at that time, if any of the commission is still concerned about that. So that would conclude our report. We're recommending approval and recommending that you adopt the resolution attached to the staff report. Oh, it also requires design, sorry, forgot one part. It requires design review because the fire department is asking them to add a second exit in the one wall of the building, but it really just adds articulation to that side of the structure. So it complies with the design review criteria. And that would conclude our report.
I have one question of staff. Are we going to hold them to the menu they attached?
I think we should.
Good.
Made me hungry.
I also think we should get samples when people are proposing a menu. I've said this before. Let's see what
After
we
the
can
hearing,
do about
after the
that.
hearing, though, yes. Well, the Indian restaurant did that. Remember, we had,
That's
they brought samosas. They were so happy.
Oh, it was before my time.
Right, it would be good if we wait till after the appeal period, too.
So the only exterior change would be that additional door for now, but there might be an outside seating area.
Right, that's the
Later
plan
under a
if
separate
things go well.
application. Would there be any change to the sign in the front?
You'll have to ask the applicant that.
Okay.
If they are going to change the sign, they do need to get a new sign permit. So
Okay,
I'm
that's
not
why I was
absolutely clear
asking.
on that.
I don't have any other questions at this point.
One of the conditions here is number 6. The applicant shall comply with the conditions of approval use permit as we've talked about, and if the traffic increases, et cetera. You know what, I would like to see that spelled out a little bit, because the applicant in possession of this permit has no clue as to what triggers the number of vehicle trips accessing the site, reaching the amount that would make use of the site, subject to traffic impact ordinance. So
So you want to quote the language from the code that makes them subject to it? We'll
if we
just
can,
insert
if we
that?
can
Sure.
give, if we can give them some kind of parameter so they can monitor
Yeah,
it.
he knows what they are, but I'll insert that language from the code in that condition so that it's clear.
What would their parameters be? Because it's at that, if it's starting to back up traffic
No,
on
it's
Sir Francis
if they're
Drake,
generating 100 average daily trips beyond the previous use, right? Yeah.
to do a reassessment of the traffic analysis that they submitted within 6 months or a year, or if we think that it's a problem, then we would ask them to reassess.
Yeah, we'll be watching,
To update their
we'll be
report.
watching it, and if all of a sudden there's traffic and parking issues that didn't exist with the bike repair place, we'll ask them to have a reevaluation of their traffic generation.
Hopefully, things will improve and you'll be generating a few more cars there.
So I had a question, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Notification went out to surrounding,
All property owners and tenants within 300 feet of the property boundaries, as required by state law, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what the fire department is requiring in terms of the exit, and just describe that a little bit better to me?
So right now, I think there's just a front door and then a door out the back. And when you have too much distance between doors in a commercial building, or if you have too much interior square footage, the fire code requires that you add an additional way to get out of the building. And so this building is large enough that when it was built, the fire code probably didn't require that much exiting, but now it's changed and they need that third doorway.
Yes, I also believe it relates to anticipated occupant load, so that also factors in.
You know, one thing that has come up before with an expansion of a business, which this is, creation of a new type of business, and the garbage service. So doesn't Fairfax have some garbage guidelines for when you have a food?
We have an ordinance.
Business,
And
there is-
they must have adequate garbage service so that it doesn't spill out of their garbage
Is that
container.
included as a condition?
We didn't include it as a condition because it's a law of the town. I can get the language if you want to insert it.
Okay. Or just be aware of that and give them a copy of it. I don't need it, but they will.
But they'll have to fulfill all those requirements of a restaurant for
Yeah,
their
I mean-
building permits and things like that, so they'll be totally aware of that.
Yeah, but
it's-
that's building permit, whereas this is a separate.
Well, it's actually a law,
ordinance?
it's a law of the town that has
Oh, okay.
nothing to do with the building permit. Businesses and residents have to comply with certain garbage
Good.
pickups so that it doesn't create a hazard or a nuisance. And
Good.
you
So
know,
if they
Garbage
get an
pick-
occupancy permit, those would be the things that would be checked, right? I mean, we
So
sort
we
of
don't, I
go,
don't think the building inspector checks that, but what happens is if someone has a dumpster for for a shared building like that and it starts spilling over and there's rats, then they get a letter from the code enforcement officer saying you don't have adequate pickup service and you need to increase your pickup or provide more bins.
because we had that with a previous building in Fair Anselm where we had that whole discussion about that applicant needing to have garbage service, so.
The new,
The
new Java hut,
the coffee-
the new brick
coffee
Java
place.
hut.
Yeah.
Yes, everybody's required to have garbage service.
And is the recycling a part of that ordinance for the garbage?
I believe it is, but I haven't read our garbage ordinance. You know, it's not in the zoning ordinance. I haven't read it recently, but I think they've updated it to include that you need to have
I
a
just
certain
encourage
amount
you
of
guys
recycling.
to really take a close look at that and recycle whatever you can.
Yeah.
And actually compost as well. Composting all the organic waste is even more important than recycling at this point. So I'm not sure where that is. I should know, but I don't know where that is in terms of requirement versus just availability, but it's definitely available. Marin Sanitary is pushing it for all restaurants, and it's a big thing, so.
And if we don't have a requirement, we should put that on our list and take a look at it.
I think it's going to be an agenda item, so. Yeah, one point also is where we have these requirements that are referenced elsewhere in the town's municipal code or indeed in the county's environmental health requirements, those are enforceable whether or not they're included as conditions of approval. So it's one of those things where if there's a problem, it'll be obvious, it'll violate some aspect of those codes, and they'll be required to resolve that in short order. So I don't think we need to worry about it. It's kind of like putting in a code that says you need to have a grease trap, things like that.
And it is in here about recycling. It doesn't talk about composting, but it does include that every occupant has to recycle, so.
What section is that?
It is 8.08.130-5E1, yeah.
Would you guys happen to have an extra copy of the code kicking around somewhere?
Would have to check with the town
Okay.
clerk. So we can ask Michelle Gardner.
It makes an excellent Christmas present.
No, you want a copy of your own code for Christmas.
That's on my wish list. Did we do the public hearing?
We haven't had the applicant either.
Oh. We've been talking to you. Please step forward if you'd like to make any comments. I'm sorry, we should have had you up. We got carried away.
Thank you. My name's Jason. I'm the one that's behind this project. Since the staff report was written, I've gotten approval from the ABC and Marin County Health for the kitchen plan and for the ABC beer wine on-site sale license. I have copies of those if you want them, but they came in this week after the staff report was written and after I received a copy of that. Otherwise, I mean, I'd be happy to answer questions or address any concerns of yours or the public.
I had a question. I've got some concerns that I'll get into later about the project, but question on the bikes.
Yeah.
So we're we're repairing bikes. Are we also, I think you're going to be a representative for a British bike or, okay, so.
I am currently.
So selling those bikes then, would you be getting bikes to put together to sell? So it's kind of assembly and then fixing, or how does that work?
Yeah, we receive the bikes from the factories directly. In the same fashion a bike shop would receive any bikes from suppliers here in the United States. So the bikes come in a box, they're 95% assembled. So we're not taking truckloads of parts, pulling out an individual part, putting it on a bike, and then selling the bike. So in that sense, we're going to function as a typical bike shop. I suspect the sales volume will be lower than what was previously there because the bikes that we represent are pretty high-end, expensive performance bikes. So the vast majority of our bicycle sales are probably going to be through the roll-up door in the back onto the UPS truck. And we average 3 to 5 bike sales a week. UPS is doing deliveries every day to the area anyway. I don't expect that's going to be impacted at all beyond what the grocery store is already taking for truck traffic.
So I noticed you have in the plans a huge list of health department requirements, so I won't go into that. But, you know, it's going to be a situation, I guess, of sort of like the Gestalt House, where people can ride bikes to your restaurant, eat, kibitz, et cetera. My only concern, and it's probably invalid, but is we don't want to get any bike grease into any food areas. And I'm sure you're really
The health
really
department's addressed that. We've revised the plan with the health department that they've approved to isolate the kitchen, restaurant, food storage areas away from any industrial or sort of warehouse shop space. There is a public space that's shared between the sort of cafe seating area and the bicycle showroom. Customers that want their bikes worked on are going to bring them in through the front door, I presume, because the emergency exit's not going to be an entryway. It's just going to be used as an emergency exit for now. They'll check in with the service manager near the front of the store. They'll leave their bike there, and then the service manager will move it to the back. There's some bike parking in the front, but there isn't an opportunity for greasy bikes or clean bikes, for that matter, to get anywhere near the food as a condition of the health department's approval already.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you about your future plans, because I understand the side door you need to make right now is just kind of an exit.
Right.
What about you mentioned in the application some future plans of having outdoor dining, and can
Correct.
you expand on that?
Yeah, so I've watched quite a few of these meetings, both for town of San Anselmo and the town of Fairfax, as I've gone through the development of this plan for myself and for the various investors that I have working with me, and it's important for us to get up and running as the primary 3 business elements. It would be great to have another outdoor eating area here in town, but I understand that citizens in the community, the planning department, and you as the commissioners will have probably a lot more input, as well as the landlord will, about how this thing looks and how it impacts the town, not just from a traffic standpoint, but from aesthetics and sort of flow of people and things like that. So I separated that out from the initial plan, and I plan, as soon as we're approved here, to work on developing the plans for that next step, and I'll bring that to you guys, and we'll probably spend a lot more time going through those plans and going back and forth to make sure that it's a warm spot in the spring and the fall, and the sun sets and the building puts shade out there in the front, the view of Mount Tam. I mean, that's the dream. Obviously, it's subject to quite a lot more input from the community, so I decided to postpone that and bring that to you in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
I'm actually curious to hear about your journey. How did you get to this point? And I guess, first of all, how long have you been the owner?
Since May.
Okay, I see.
How much of my
Okay.
journey do you want to hear?
Well, no, I was just curious. I wasn't sure if you, if you were the operator and the owner of the bike shop, because I think this is a great idea. This is a underutilized space, I think, in Fairfax. And so I was just curious how
agree.
you came to
How
this
did I come to it?
conclusion.
Well, I was vice president of product development for a bicycle company in Nevada called Marin Bikes for 9 years. The company was bought. Things got strange. I left and I started my own design engineering consulting company working specifically within the bicycle industry. I was doing some work for this brand White in the UK, doing some design work as they were going through a period of transition. And I was sitting with their marketing guy and their product guy after finishing some work at a factory in Taiwan. And we got to talking about the bicycle industry and things like that. And my experience, it runs pretty deep, having been in the bicycle industry here in Marin County, well, basically since college. And we kind of got to talking. We sort of hatched this plan, and it was a funny thing. I got on the airplane and I wrote a proposal thinking, well, I'll throw it over the fence and sort of see what happens. And they came back the next day and they said, this sounds great, let's do it. Well, and at that point, I had to sort of scramble to try and figure out like the rest of the plan. So I started this business about 2 years ago, and I've been operating it out of my house in Woodacre. Just the consumer direct bicycle retail sales that we run through our website, the White Bikes USA. It's always been a part of the plan to build a showroom in a place that's a little bit more commercial than my residence. And as we moved along and traveling around and talking to people and watching what's happening with retail generally across all sectors, but in the bicycle industry in particular, where bicycle retail shops are really struggling to stay in business and really having a hard time compelling customers to actually come in the front door and spend money. Trying to create a unique sort of shopping experience for people and give them a reason to come in and create a sort of community around that. And I started talking to Brian, and I've been going to that bike shop. I grew up in Woodacre. I moved there when I was 7 in 1980, 81. And Fairfax has kind of been my downtown because Woodacre doesn't have anything more than a post office and a little store. And I worked at the grocery store when I was 15. I worked at Gary & Gelly's Pizza in my teens when I was in high school at Drake. So like Fairfax is my town in that way. And I had the opportunity to go get an industrial space in San Rafael, and I started looking at the prices of rent. And I started having a conversation with Brian, the previous business owner, more than a year and a half ago. And it took me a long time to convince him to sell because he was pretty comfortable there. But I finally did, and I was able to put it together and get enough people, sort of friends and family to lift the project up and get it across the line. So that's how I got here.
Thank you. That's a wonderful story.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Okay, now I have some questions about, I guess, music. Do you plan to have music in this location?
Not live music. I mean, there'll be music
Okay.
playing, jukebox or kind of maybe whatever's on a television or something like that, but
Okay.
not live music.
Okay, and so I was looking at this, as far as a design review, so are we doing a design review? It sounds like there's something else maybe coming down the pipe later, but I'm trying to understand what the design changes to the building are.
The only design change at this point is the new exit that's being added in the east wall.
It's a glass garage
Right.
door.
Yeah, and the reason I added the garage doors is because I do plan to come to you later in the fall and add this second outside component. And it's just sort of being cost efficient. To have somebody come out and cut a hole in a concrete wall is pretty expensive, and it's not that much more to make the hole bigger when they're already out there. So the wall doesn't have any windows in it anyway, and it would be nice to have the additional light, and I guess I've spent more money than I should on a window if I don't get the permission to go outside, but it's going to be nice to have the light there anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful solution, actually.
And just to clarify, the fire department's requirement for the emergency exit, it has to be 1/3 the distance of the longest length from diagonal across. The back door can't be considered an emergency exit or an exit entryway at all because it's a roll-up industrial door. So the only place to put it is in that wall.
Does it have a man door?
So yes, the man door is the required distance away. The roll-up door is actually not far enough away to be considered an emergency exit, but it's a roll-up door anyway. You can't just push through it. So the man door is the emergency exit, and then adjacent to that would be the roll-up door.
All right. In terms of lighting, so you're not adding any new lighting to the exterior of the building?
No, there's
Okay.
lights there that are not used. I would like to use them, but I'm not adding anything.
Okay.
Well, we'll see how it looks, actually. I don't know if shining lights in the windows, because they're like floodlights, you know,
Okay.
on the eaves, underneath the eaves of the exterior of the building. Only at the front, not around the side.
Your hours of operation, so I was looking at your hours of operation, which can go pretty late for a residential area, and I was trying to understand from this photograph what is behind to the north of the building?
It's a garden area for the Bennett house, I think. There's nothing, there's no structures directly there. The majority of the people that were in the notification radius, I think, were Bennett house residents. I'm not sure of their exact address there. I had to do a notification for the ABC as well, and so I don't exactly remember, because the radiuses were different for different parts of the project, so.
So, Linda, if there are complaints later because of the late hours, that would be addressed with the owner, correct?
You know, the
For
grocery
noise.
store is open from 6 a.m.
Till 1, I know.
Yeah.
to 2 a.m.
Oh, 2, is it 2 now?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
mean, it
good
was
to know.
24, and then they pulled it back
Yeah.
from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. So.
And the Bennett House building is really, you know, you go past the grocery store and through
Yeah.
that walk up. It's really behind, the grocery store is kind of between this use
Yeah,
and
it's not
Bennett
really a
House.
direct line.
But if there are ever noise complaints, you know, if they come in after hours, the police respond to them and determine if anyone's violating the noise ordinance. If it's during work hours, our code enforcement officer will respond, so.
And this is a highway commercial zone, and we're on Sir Francis Drake, so
Right,
I would be
and-
surprised if we were going to be louder than traffic.
Yeah, no, I was more concerned about noise from the restaurant, but that would be facing Sir Francis Drake, so it's not such an issue for the Bennett House. Your hours of operation for the warehouse and, you know, the bike shop, are those, they're
They're
not
all
the
the same.
same?
It's gonna be the
Oh, they
same.
are the same?
Yeah, the
Okay.
idea is to have,
Yeah.
there's not going to be, well, it could be, it depends on the workload, but we plan to have service mechanics on staff during all open hours as part of our sort of clever business model. So somebody can come in before a ride because they forgot to fix their bike, and it's early, they can grab a cup of coffee while we fix their bike, or after a ride, they sit down and they have a meal, and we can work on their bike at that time. So as a function of that, there could be people building bikes that have been sold online or for the store, or for demo or whatever. There's no machinery involved in that. It's all handwork, so it's not going to generate noise.
Are you planning to add any sound insulation to the interior?
Well, there's going to have to be some baffles. It's a concrete box, so I don't think it transmits sound.
No, I was just curious for my own comfort.
When you come in to visit.
Right.
Well, we'll have to sort of look at it.
Yeah.
I know that it's been an issue in places with big high ceilings and not a lot of stuff in between them. I have an interior designer that I'm working with that has some clever ideas about how to break up the space. Once we're put together, we'll have to figure that out and address it as it comes. I don't want it to be a big resonant chamber where there's people in there and they can't talk to each other and they have to talk louder, and so they have to talk louder, and then all of a sudden everybody's yelling. I'll go nuts.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, just, I'm curious to know if you're doing anything.
I don't want that to happen.
Okay, all right. All my other questions, I think, are going to be handled by the health department, just in terms of the function and no crossover of fumes into the restaurant area. It sounds like that's being addressed by the health department.
Yeah, their requirements for a class 1 hood with, like outside air coming in, so we're not creating a vacuum in the space. And the last requirement that came through, which is one of the final conditions that they put on, it's a conditional approval based on 3 points, and one of them was that the fresh air and the exhaust are interlocked, so we're isolating the air in the area where it's being drawn from. They're very concerned about oil smoke, even though I don't plan to do a lot of cooking that creates oil smoke. I wasn't able to dodge that requirement, so I just embraced it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Seems to be all the questions for you. Appreciate your being here.
Thank you for
Sounds
listening.
like an interesting idea. Is there anyone in the public who would like to comment on this project? Not hearing anybody, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to discussion with Commissioner.
So I had one, actually correction to the Resolution 1732, and that is the proposal where under the last whereas, the proposal complies with Fairfax General Plan policies. The word "with" is missing is all. And then I'll just want to reiterate that I'd like to give the applicant something in this permit that gives them a little more information about vehicle trips and how they might be able to figure that out themselves. Other than that, I think it's a terrific idea, a great project. I used to get my bike fixed there all the time. Now I'll come in there and I won't have to walk across the street to get a coffee, so that's terrific.
So I'll go next. So I've got some concerns with this project. A lot of folks come into the community and say that Fairfax is a destination city, or their commercial entity or what they're coming before us is going to make us more of a destination. So this project's kind of no different with that. We're talking about a bike shop, restaurant, gathering. I think it was identified as bike, retail, lifestyle, destination, cafe. What I see are kind of two main pieces to this. One is the bike shop piece of it, and then the other piece of this that I see is the after-hours restaurant. So we've got a restaurant in this area that can be open till 11 o'clock at night, serving food, beer and wine, with seating for 57 people, large screen TVs so that they're in there and they can watch events or music or whatever on that. The closest restaurant in that area is M&G's across the street, which is a small, more family-style restaurant. Doesn't stay open, I don't think, past like 9 o'clock during the week. So my concerns here are the potential in this area for noise, for more traffic, for more traffic pattern changes, like with turning in and out of that area. Those are just concerns to me on this project. And I think, and it may work out fine. What I was thinking of is the possibility of, if we issued a permit, that this permit be of a temporary nature so that we could come back and assess it after that period of time. Just my thoughts on it.
Can staff tell me the driveways there, is that are there one or two driveways going into
I
that
believe
site?
there's two. You know, there's
There's
more than
two.
two, but there's two on that end. Am I right
There
about
are
that?
two, there's the road kind of curves, so there's one before the curve,
There's
just
one
at
on one
the
side of
beginning
the
of this
sign
property.
and one on the other side,
And then
yeah.
then there's a crosswalk, and then there's the other driveway. And that other driveway is very close to this storefront. As you pull into that driveway, that you very quickly are into that space along the front of the grocery store where a lot of people park. That works really well for the grocery store, but it's not going to work for this property because it's sort of inherently short-term parking. People park, go into the store. But coming in on that driveway and then parking over on the side where the main parking is going to be for this establishment, and which parking is not very highly utilized right now because this establishment will probably get more business than the existing bike shop. It's a little bit of a sharp turn. May not be obvious for people to do that, and you may need to slow down a bit coming off of the Sir Francis Drake in order to safely make that turn. The other driveway would be better, but it's not too clear, as I recall, especially to someone who's not used to it, that driveway is really there. You sort of, by the time you see the business that you're looking for, the driveway is behind you. So possibly signage or something might be able to mitigate that.
If you're concerned about that, I would recommend adding a condition that the town engineer review that situation, and if he has any recommendations for those, you know, if he feels anything should be installed, that his
Yeah.
condition be
Yeah, I mean, I would
complied
describe it
with.
as not being terrible, but being possibly improvable if someone with the proper understanding could take a look at it.
Are the spaces in front of the market designated for the market? So the bikers and the cafe goers could be parking there. Is there a time limit? I'm not remembering.
There's no markings in the parking lot. You might ask the applicant, I don't know what his lease says, but, you know, when I go there, I just park wherever I'm closest to, you know? It's not, there's no markings that say this is parking for the grocery store, this is parking for the bike shop, you know?
It is open parking for all the businesses. And both of those driveways, are they only a right turn? Can you also exit? You can go both ways?
Yeah, there's no direction on those as exits or entries or anything.
So it's hard to get in or out of there. Well, it's easier to get in. It's harder to get out, especially up at the market, at the lot past the market.
You know, it all depends what time of day you're doing it, and it's like that for the veterinary, it's like that for any of the businesses. There's times when I can't cross over and go east, I have to go west and then turn and come back. So that's a condition that's commonly found all along all those businesses.
I think
I
it's
would
a great
say-
idea to add a condition that the engineer take a look at that. And then also maybe you could post something in your shop for your tenants, for your customers, to know that you have that large parking area just prior to your building.
Yeah, the exiting, you mentioned exiting those driveways. Exiting the driveway, that first driveway as you're going westbound, in other words, the most easterly driveway, would be more dicey because you're coming
close to the
out
light.
so close to the light. Yeah.
And to the museum exit as well. Maybe that should be just an in drive.
So I'm not a traffic engineer. I would rather just leave it
Have
up to
the engineer take a
the
look at
town
it.
traffic engineer to determine
That
whether,
would be my suggestion, yeah. that someone
And
look
if
at it.
any-
whether anything's
Any
necessary.
signage is required. That's a
Right,
good
or whether
idea.
any signage will improve this, you know,
Let's
maybe
make,
arrows painted on the,
let's make that a condition. That would be very helpful.
I wanted to comment on Cindy's suggestion that we might do this temporarily, and I don't like that idea. I think that the capital expense of investing in creating this restaurant necessitates that we approve it or disapprove it, as opposed to approve it temporarily with the possibility that we might disapprove it later.
How do you, sorry, I was just going to ask you, how do you feel about just approving the project, but doing a temporary approval on the hours of operation to see how it's working for the neighborhood? The reason I'm saying this, I'm in total support of this project. I think it's brilliant, actually. But I am concerned about how we're changing the fabric of this part of town. We do have another restaurant coming in across the street where the gas station is. I've been to the Fairfax market late at night, and it's really quiet there. You almost get a sense of being out in the country in a residential area. And I'm a little concerned about the hours. I'm kind of on the fence. So I'm in total support of the project, but the hours I'm a little iffy on. Maybe well, for the weekend, no, but I think we are making such a big change to this area that I'd like to see how the hours work, and maybe it's something that can be addressed with the town just in terms of adjusting hours, but I am reluctant to approve very specific hours of operation at this time.
Well, I think, that's one of the reasons when we look at, and we've done time-limited permits for businesses in the downtown area as well, and they've had to come back. I just, agree with you that this is something that impacts potentially that neighborhood. It's got the hours. I'm not sure how the trips, the additional trips and then the traffic, and I'm just trying to balance that with the impact on the community in the neighborhood, which is one of the requirements. So that's why I think it's better to go with a temporary permit, give it a period of time, come back. If it's working, then we remove that. If it's not, then we have that option to relook.
In the past, what we've done is, it doesn't seem like we're in disagreement about allowing this new idea to go forward, but there might be concerns about traffic and hours. We have in the past set up a 6-month or an 8-month review.
Right,
to do an assessment, and that might be a good way to approach it, because as long as it's clear in our documents that we have the option at that time, if it's a problem, to make some changes.
That's right, and I just wanted to, you should refer to it as a review of the conditional use permit. You're not granting a temporary permit. Once you grant the use permit and make the findings, but you are allowed to review it and assess whether you need to modify conditions, right, or add additional conditions.
That's what I wanted.
Okay, perfect. That should do it then.
We've given sort of a review period in 6 months or so to projects that are unusual, that have, an outside trailer outside the pub, and noise issues and things like that, to see if that continues, because we've had, remember, we had egregious neighbors who hated the noise on those projects. So I'm not totally inclined to do a review period even. And I've frequented this area for many years, and it is very quiet at night, and it's going to make some changes. I think if neighbors don't like it, they'll come forward and complain rather than having a review. That's how I feel about that.
One thought, if I might interject, is that they will be coming back for the outside seating, and that's kind of one of those areas where it could make a difference, especially with later in the evening hours where you have restaurant uses, people dining, people enjoying themselves. I would suggest that might be the time to get further into details relating to noise, because noise is probably going to be the number one thing. I mean, one of the things that's going to happen as you get into the evening hours is you're not going to have any problems turning right or left. It's more during your peak hours where the traffic's going one way or another. But I would suggest that maybe when he comes back and says, okay, now I want to do my outdoor seating, that's when you really pay attention to, okay, this is when the ambient noise levels will be down. This is when people, if you have outside music, canned or otherwise, it'll be more noticeable. We could.
Is outside music allowed there? I would not want, I am not of the opinion that we should allow outdoor music and bands just because there's a space big enough to put the band.
Right. Remember, outdoor music and outdoor seating requires a use permit. So they're going to be coming back to modify their use permit if they decide they want to have outdoor music, and then you don't have to allow it.
We would likely not.
He's,
I don't have any desire to. There's plenty of places for live music in Fairfax already.
Exactly, and that's a big enough problem for us as it is. Thank you.
So the issue,
I-
though, with that is if they decide not to do the outdoor seating, then we haven't given them that review
Well,
to come back
so-
and re-look.
so anytime there's a problem with an existing business, neighbors can request that the use permit be reviewed. So you can put an automatic, we want to review this in a year, but it can be reviewed anyway if it causes problems.
Understand,
Yeah.
but I still would feel more comfortable having them come back and then we do the relook.
So you have to see if the rest of your commissioners share your.
I'd like to change the direction a little bit, and I don't know whether I can, this isn't about a condition, but this is just, I would like to share your creativity a bit. Oh, that microphone is on. That's part of the reason where, maybe if you could come up, I'd like to ask you something. Because of the fact that you're involved in the bicycle business and you're creative, it's kind of an inherently strange thing that people come to town to ride their bikes, but they usually come to town in an automobile, very often in an SUV, and then park it in order to get their bike out and go for a ride. And so what could we possibly do, and I'm not even expecting you to answer this now, but I just really like to engage your creativity in trying to get the people who do come to town to use this as a base to do their bike rides, to figure out a way to carpool or get here some other way besides driving. I think that would go a long way to easing some of the perceived friction with bicyclists, and also just really doing a lot more for a sustainable way of life for bicyclists.
Well, there's a couple points. First of all, just as a sort of an anecdote, it speaks to the traffic issues and the use of the parking lot, sort of more generally. The bike shop opens at 10 o'clock on Saturday mornings. I'm usually there by 8 or 8:30, taking care of stuff, business paperwork, stuff like that, and the parking lot's full. And these aren't people that are at the grocery store, grocery shopping on Saturday morning. These are people that have come to town in their vehicles to go ride their bikes. They're not coming into the shop. Maybe they come in later, but usually it's just to buy in the rear a Tamarancho pass for the day, the $5 Boy Scout pass. So they've at least, paid what they're supposed to, but there's nowhere for them to buy that pass that early in the morning. There will be, and hopefully they'll buy a cup of coffee or something like that too. As I was doing my research on the traffic impacts and looking at the different types of uses and typical car loads for shopping versus recreation versus entertainment or meals, very often people that are driving for recreational activities are putting more people in their cars. The average is much higher. It's over 2 versus less than 2 for other types of trips. I don't have anything as evidence to offer you to say that people are carpooling, but very often, you see the bike racks on the back of the cars and the bikes pulling in, there's 2 or 3 or 4 bikes per vehicle. That's one of the reasons people drive SUVs, is because they can pile everybody in and all take one car. I think as a generalization of cyclists, I think they already are environmentally aware, and it's one of the things that's drawn them to cycling, whether it's mountain biking or using a bike as a commuting tool or simply as a fitness tool. Of course, I hope that this place becomes a community center and an influential place, not just among community members, but people from outside the area, and helps to teach them good practices about healthy living and things like that. But, I can tell you, and I can put it on my website that says, we encourage visitors to ride their bikes or carpool, which I'd be happy to do, but I can't really enforce it.
Well, you mentioned building a community, and so in any way that you can allow that community for people to find ways to combine trips.
Absolutely,
that would be great.
and Fairfax is a bit of a crossroads for all sorts of types of cycling.
It is,
For
yes.
people that live out where I live in Woodacre, they ride their bikes into town as Vernon does to get to his job in Santa Fe, or I do to get to my job in Fairfax now.
Yeah, my bike is parked out front, yeah.
Yeah.
riding from point A to point B, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're riding a road bike and you're coming from San Francisco and riding to Point Reyes, or you're starting in Fairfax and going out to Bolinas, or you're riding a mountain bike and you start in Santa Fe and you're going to ride up Mount Tam. A lot of people do come through on their bikes. The ones that we see that drive are the ones that drive, so it's a little hard to count. But we have a lot of people that just ride their bikes into the parking lot, and I don't know that they're all necessarily local residents. They could be from further away. I like to ride my bike to my ride. I don't like to get in a car to go for a bike ride, but I live in a great place to do that, so not
Yeah,
everybody's so fortunate.
right, we're lucky, yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I'm just going to go back to talking with the other commissioners, but unless somebody else has a question for you.
Go sit down then. Okay.
For me? Thanks. Getting back to the question of temporary, approval to bring something back, if we were very specific about the conditions that we wanted to bring back, I might not be, opposed. If we were specific that we were talking about the noise and the traffic flow, and just brought it back to re-examine those, unless there was something else, Cindy, that you were thinking of.
Time of operation.
Yeah, the time.
Those are the three that I think I would be comfortable with.
What do you think, Phil?
I still think it's unnecessary, because if somebody has a problem, they'll come tell us, hopefully. But limiting to the three issues there, I don't have as much a problem with it as I may have had before. So I like this project. I think it's great. I'm coming in for a sandwich and a coffee when I get my bike fixed next. So, that's the feeling. And another thing I want to add to my fellow commissioners is I shop at the Fairfax Market a lot, and I notice that parking lot is 75% or more empty almost all the time. And sometimes they're there at midnight, sometimes they're at 5 p.m. And it's just, especially that side, the bike shop side of that parking lot is almost unutilized. Another thing to recall is that we approved a permit for the gas station when it was turned into sort of a festival of antiques without so many conditions, as I recall. So, this is much less of a use, and there's a trend, I think, at that end of town. We do have the restaurant, it's going to be a barbecue restaurant going in there. We have M&G, we have this place, and maybe we'll get that dirt berm fixed up as something as well. And I recall the owner of this lot even wanted to expand the other side of the market. Don't touch your berm. Gophers love it. So it's one of those, there has been a trend there, and I just like the project. But I could go for conditional, maybe 1-year review for certain conditions.
I have a question for the applicant. We were talking about, taking a pause and reassessing, possibly reviewing, but you were talking about putting in an outside seating area, and is there a timeline for that? Are you planning to run that parallel with the rest of the application, or are you going to wait?
Well, I mean, assuming that I get approval from you guys for the conditional use and I move to apply for my building permits in 11 days. I mean, this project is taking a lot longer to get started than I had planned, being new to this whole process. I expected delays, but I wasn't sure where they were going to come from. My plan is as soon as we have the building permits and the conditional use approval from you, is to start planning that second phase of this business. My expectation, given what I know now about the process and also about the nature of that part of the business being maybe a little bit more contentious within the community, questions about noise or additional traffic certainly are going to be coming up much more strongly. And I want to be able to take the time to address those things with the community and with the commission as it goes without impacting my base business, which I really, really need to get going, or we're not going to get off the ground.
Okay, so that kind of goes back to the conditions. Can we say that we wait, just because we can't predict when that's going to kick in, can we say that the outdoor seating, I guess, cannot be approved before 6 months? Trying to figure out where to put that in, if we put that in. No, I'm just saying that if we're talking about a year's time to revisit this, the traffic, the noise, the times of operation, I'm not sure if we're talking about a year or 6 months or 3 months. I'm just trying to figure out how to sequence that with the outdoor seating area is what I think what I'm getting at. I don't know if that should even be a concern.
I don't think I would even connect it
Okay.
with the outdoor
Okay.
seating at all. I would just,
Because that's-
then we'll
that's
look at that.
hypothetical.
If it comes
Okay.
forward. I
Okay.
would look at, I'm not sure what a reasonable time is to relook this once it's up and running.
I just think a new business, people have to find out about it before, so 6 months doesn't sound like enough time to me. I think you need to give it at least a year, if
6
not
months
more.
from now, it'll be winter.
Yeah.
Can I address this question just, and this is maybe being a little bit forward, but I don't need to remind you, but this is this is the highway commercial zone of downtown Fairfax, right? And you're referencing the neighborhood, but there isn't a residence within view of anywhere in that parking lot. And I appreciate the spirit of what you're trying to do. You're trying just to make sure that if there is an impact on the community, we have an opportunity to review that sort of officially. And I don't know what that looks like if we come back before this and there's an additional notification and all that. As a collection, it's going to come up, right? It does make me nervous, frankly, to have to come back before this board and sort of ask for permission to continue to operate my business as it's been designated just from the get-go. Because it is going to be my business and my livelihood, and to sort of have that looming over me isn't terribly comfortable.
Well, I can definitely see that, and Linda has pointed out a couple of times that that if there's a complaint, then we would hear about it, or the town would hear about it. And I guess I wonder what might happen with the outdoor seating, but we don't have to consider that tonight. We'll know a lot more when that happens. But where the noise would come from, assuming that your patrons don't go outside in the parking lot and get rowdy in the parking lot, if they just stay indoors and then they go out and leave, then the noise should be contained indoors, because it's a completely indoor venue, and it's a pretty solid building as well.
Exactly,
it's not like
yeah.
it's got windows all the way around.
Correct.
So I'm just not too worried about the noise level, and as you point out, it is the highway commercial area. It is on a highway. We had an application last month that we finished up with that was a nursery school, and there were some complaints about the noise there, and it was pointed out to us that it was very difficult to measure the noise because Sir Francis Drake right near there was louder than the noise that was being discussed. So
I watched that.
that'll be the case here too. So
Doing my homework.
that was not our first time with that one. We got through it though. So I guess my inclination, I definitely see your point, and I understand being proactive about it, but I also sympathize with the business owner, or hopefully business owner, that it's really difficult to plan when you've got this uncertainty laid in front of you. I would be content myself if other commissioners were with just saying that if there aren't any complaints, then we're doing all right with the present situation, not with the outdoor seating. That's a separate question.
I guess I just don't see that coming back, let's say, in a year to review the conditions. We're reviewing the conditions of the permit. that gives us an opportunity to look at these things, to look at the hours or anything else. It also gives the public an opportunity to come back if there's concerns from the public. So I just think it's prudent to do that at this point.
About what that would look like. I mean, I'm just thinking this through. So would, in whatever period of time we have a review, would we, notify the applicant that they have to come back here and present a review, and then we notify the 300 people, 300 feet around the public, which we've done for tonight, and who have already had an opportunity to come here and oppose the project? Or would it be something else like the building official reviewing the project for complaints or something? I'm not quite sure how that would work, so that's a
So the way
question for you.
it usually works is, we put it on our calendar, we remind the applicant that it is coming up for review, we do the normal noticing, and then we will probably check with the police department to see if there have been any noise complaints, before we write the staff report, and we'll just remind you of what you did at this meeting, attach the minutes. So that's how that works. But I just want to remind everybody that there's 2 doors to this building, which has pretty thick concrete walls, and the front door faces Fairfax Lumber and M&G Burgers and Sir Francis Drake. The new side door faces a large parking lot and the gas station. And so, I mean, the outdoor seating is a whole different issue, which we aren't really discussing tonight because it's not proposed. If you start having large groups of people gathering and making noise in a parking lot, the police will be called and it will stop. So I understand that some of you want to review staff. I don't see the necessity for it unless there's like a repeated problem, and then it will be brought to our attention by the police or by a neighbor, right?
I would also point out under use permit findings, finding B, the development and use of the property under the use permit will not cause excessive or unreasonable detriment to adjoining properties or premises, or cause adverse physical or economic effects thereto, or create undue or excessive burdens in the use and enjoyment thereof of any or all of which effects are substantially beyond that which might occur without approval or issuance of the use permit. Relating to your comment, Commissioner, about what they would entail, and I would also direct this to the applicant, if there are problems, he will know about it. And this is one of these things where it can and should be self-correcting in a very quick period of time. This isn't going to operate as a bar or a nightclub where, people are going to be potentially getting pretty rowdy outside. I would hope that this would be operated in a much more conventional manner. And as pointed out, the outdoor seating is, I think, where things could start to get to be problematic. But really this comes down to proper management. And so when we're looking at, and again, the fact that I think there's an agreement that the town engineer, town engineer will look at traffic circumstances in terms of turns. And of course, Mr. Rosinski is very familiar with traffic patterns. And so I don't anticipate starting up that there's going to be a major problem that couldn't be resolved fairly readily, whether it's additional signage or something like that. But in terms of the review of the terms of the use permit, if there's an issue before this commission, if it comes back, if the determination is made to come back in a year, you as an operator and the proprietor will be very aware of that ahead of time, because the police will be talking to you, we'll be talking to you, there'll be complaints lodged. I mean, one thing about Marin is they're not reticent about complaining about problems. So it's one of those things where maybe you start to have a couple people that are expressing some concerns about doors slamming. I'm not even sure if that will be something that you will notice given the location of where most people will park. But it's up to the commission whether they feel as though this is necessary at this time, or we can use the normal conditional use permit provisions here to say if we need to re-review it and perhaps adjust the hours of operation, that would be a typical thing is, hey, we're not getting any problems until 11 o'clock at night. Maybe it's time to consider pushing this back to 9 o'clock at night or something like that. But your commission's call.
I tend to agree with our planning director now that there are plenty of conditions in the existing use permit, and if sufficient complaints are generated, then that would be coming back to us whether or not we have a requirement to review it in 6 months or 8 months. If there's a certain number of complaints, then we should hear about, we'll know about it, and we can deal with it then. And
and just one last comment, if you would let me. This is my livelihood, right? This is everything I have is going into this, and if it doesn't work for the community, that's it for me. So it's sort of self-policing in that way. If there's complaints or if I hear loud rowdiness outside, I'm going to put a stop to it because I need this business to operate and to continue and be an ongoing concern. And it's important for me to stay a good neighbor in the community. Otherwise, yeah, you guys aren't going to let me stick around, right?
So of the three things we talked about as the conditions that might warrant coming back, the noise, hours of operation, and the traffic, potential implications for the traffic, the one that concerned me the most was the traffic. And I think with the condition that we've been talking about, to have the engineer come out and look at that as part of the approval process and to make any recommendations to help, soften any difficulties with that entrance and exit from that side of the market parking lot. I think that resolves most of my concerns, and I would be willing to go along with Norma's approach in terms of not including a time frame for coming back again.
I was just going to ask, would you consider just changing the Sunday night close time to 10?
Yeah, I actually anticipate the Sunday night close is going to be quite a lot earlier than that. I don't know when the customers are going to come. I had left the hours pretty far open to ask for those hours. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I've been coming to Fairfax for a long time. It seems like it shuts down pretty early on a Sunday evening. I'm not going to pay employees to watch TV, so if the hours of operation ending at 10 or 9 or 8 on a Sunday, it really will be sort of determined by commercially what's going on there. I'm just sort of asking for the maximum. And I think it was actually a typo. I didn't plan to stay open until 11 o'clock on Sunday, if that's what's in there. I think it says 10. Does it? Yeah, I don't want to be there that late on a Sunday night myself.
So
You can amend that to 9 or 10 or 10's fine.
10's good. I think, that's when.
Well, Sunday says 10. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I thought. But I think in Linda's
It's
staff
Friday
report.
and Saturday that are 11.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the staff report, so it's,
Right.
I think that
Sunday
might have just
says
been
10.
a mix-up between the staff report and my application.
I'm good with 10.
Okay. Me too.
Yes. I'm with those commissioners who feel that noise, I mean, the noise of the traffic on Sir Francis Drake would almost drown out anything that might be generated, I think. Traffic being the main issue, hours of operation, you'll probably adjust that as time goes on. So I would propose a condition that parking flow is to be reviewed by the town engineer to advise whether additional signage or markings or other features might improve traffic and parking. That is the condition that I would add to this, and that takes care kind of the traffic review idea. And I just don't like the one-year review. I mean, the idea here, I mean, I'm sorry about that, but I just feel like we've imposed these reviews on projects that have especially major noise components because we've had neighbors come in with such vociferous objections. Here we don't have, well, so far we don't have that. And it just doesn't seem consistent to apply a period review to that and let, you know, as Ben said, for sure, we want to, you know, let the public complain if they're going to.
Can you make that into a motion?
Okay, I would move that we approve the permit as written, with the addition that condition 6 or finding 6 be spelled out a little bit, so the maybe the exact words of the ordinance that subjects the traffic study, so they get a little bit of a heads up as to what that traffic trigger would be. And then add a further condition that says basically that, as I said, parking flow is to be reviewed by the town engineer to advise whether additional signage or other features or markings may improve traffic and parking. And with that, I would move to approve
And that would be
permit
prior
number-
to issuance, right?
Prior to issuance, yes. That town engineer traffic review would be prior to issuance. As far as resolution 1732, I would move to approve it with those two additions.
I second the motion.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. There is a 10-day appeal period, and then I don't know the length of time required for the engineer to review things, but that might,
No, he's pretty fast. This is
Okay.
this is the traffic engineer, so, and, you know,
Okay.
unless they're out of town, and he has, anyway.
thank you.
Add a corned beef on rye to your menu. Thank you.
Good luck. That could be really nice on that end of the,
Can we go back to 64 Cypress and just somebody clarify for me? I think we talked about a parking variance in that motion. Can somebody show me where
Oh,
that is?
No, somebody made I think Norma said if they wanted to try to keep the 18-foot deep compact parking stalls, they would need a parking variance, but the architect and the owner, they agree to just shift the garage
Okay.
back so it meets the 19.
But we didn't put that in the resolution we
Yeah,
just
there
did.
is
You
a
did.
condition for
Yeah, Phil added
19-foot
it.
deep parking spaces.
Phil added it
Right.
in the
Okay.
reso, yeah. Yeah. It became the missing number.
But yeah, that was the one that was missing.
But thanks for checking, because when it gets this late, I'm like, did we do that? Did we?
no, it seems late, but it's one of the earliest nights we've had in years, so let's keep rolling.
Celebrate with a 5-minute break? Hey.
Sure.
You guys want a break? Ben has, or someone, staff, has found this list. Some of these items look familiar to me on the first 6, and then I think some might be missing. I'll look and see if I can't find something other, but this is good enough to start talking about, and Commissioner Green's list would keep us busy for the next few years, and then the backside of the list could take us another couple of years. So we're, how would you, Ben, had you thought of a way to start this discussion?
Well, first of all, this is just kind of an introduction and a catch-up. As you noted, I met with the chair earlier this week to go over these and answer any questions that she might have. But, you know, one of the things that came up was any number of these items appear to have already been achieved, which is great. You know, it's amazing how you put something down in writing and the next thing you know, it kind of triggers activity in that direction. Another thing I mentioned was the possibility of doing some kind of planning commission retreat independent of your regular meeting, where we can kind of look at work items, come up with a prioritization, because as also noted by the chair, there's no way we're going to get through all of these, but it would be good to just rank them and get an idea. With some lead time, I think staff could give an approximation of what we anticipate the type of resources it would take. This could also go into next year's budget. And, you know, if there's something that we think really deserves attention, figure out if we have the resources to do that in the next year or so, or certainly get started. And then other things, zoning changes, I mean, I'm going to be reporting on a couple things that are coming up. So, yeah, have that conversation now. If we have time at regular meetings and people have new items to add, and if something seems like we really have to get going on that, you know, maybe we could just sort of focus on that with the commission's direction to staff to get going on that. Otherwise, I'd really love to just have a focused day where we just discuss what might be involved with these various things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to zoning amendments.
So I was the one that brought this up. And a lot of these things, you know, I wasn't on the commission, I hadn't participated in this. What would be helpful to me when I was reading through this is, for some of these, I didn't quite understand what it was referring to. There wasn't any code references in there that I could look at to try and get a sense of, you know, what the issue was or that type of thing. And so that would be helpful. And then, as you said, some of these things may already have been addressed, so kind of taking those off the list would be helpful as well for however we approach this, either in like a workshop or, you know, taking chunks of it at future meetings, but that would be helpful. And then aside kind of from this list, just one other thing that I was thinking of was that I think it's important for planning to do is going back to the maps and having current mapping, zoning maps. I think from my perspective, that would be, you know, and that doesn't necessarily get into things that we as planning commissioners would delve into, like the material on here, but I think that's kind of critical for what planning does, what supports us in what we do, and then, you know, what the community requires. And there's, in the code, there's, I think, a requirement to do that. So I think that's kind of a key issue right off the top. And some of that was things that, with a petition that I was, you know, researching and looking at the zoning maps and trying to get a sense of how some of our open space parks, et cetera, were zoned. That kind of led me going back to the issue of keeping our maps more current than they are. And, you know, I walk into town hall and I see the two big maps on the wall when you walk in there, and I think they're dated 2012, I think. But those, you know, I mean, that's kind of like something that, you know, a community member goes in and walks into town hall and sees those, and those aren't accurate either. So I think that's just a real critical thing to work from, and then also to, you know, have that community faith in kind of the whole planning issue.
The zoning ordinance map, that's right, because we're recording. The zoning ordinance map is way outdated and out of compliance with our general plan, but it has also been the third rail around here for many, many years. I'm thinking, though, that with our required general plan amendment, I will leave out my characterization of it, that might be a good opportunity for us to adopt that zoning map that was always tied with some third rail issue that the community was up in arms about. But I think it makes sense that we should adopt that at the same time. Otherwise, the new regulation is worthless itself. I mean, it's worthless as it is, but even more so if we don't have a zoning map that's current and in compliance. So I see that as an opportunity to at least have one good piece of work done as an outcome of this new general plan amendment. One thing I would really like to bring forward for future discussion that planning director and I talked about briefly yesterday was to look at, for instance, this project, 70 Manzanita Road, that had minor tweaking of a roof line. That was a fairly straightforward modification that nobody had a problem with. That there was a lot of time and resources that went into developing that staff report and coming to us, and the noticing required, that I think that maybe we can come up with some type of standards that would allow administrative reviews and approvals of certain items that we can agree to as minor modifications. I'd also like to look at time limits to our planning commission meetings. I don't think it's to anybody's advantage that we sit here at 2 o'clock in the morning and rewrite an ordinance that in fact later was thrown out for one reason or another. I know it's difficult because of the scheduling and the requirement that we review projects within a certain time period. I think it's clear a couple of items that we have considered or that we have completed is the second unit ordinance. The tree ordinance might be a good thing to take a look at. The green building ordinance, I think, would be a great thing to take a look at. We've talked a lot about things tonight, such as solar and efficient water heaters and gray water requirements that I'd love to see us take a firmer position on. And I'll leave it at that for now.
So, you know, Bruce and Phil and I all participated in the General Plan Implementation Committee, which spent a great deal of time and energy looking at the various to-do tasks for the various departments within the town, and creating a matrix to be able to sort them. And I wonder to what extent this list reflects things that are in the general plan that we need to implement. So that would be one kind of cross-referencing I definitely think we need to do before we try and prioritize. There are some other things not on this list that have come, you know, up in the course of my tenure on this body. And like Cindy, I don't necessarily understand because I probably wasn't here for a lot of these things that are on this list. So I don't necessarily have a position one way or the other until I understand the issues better. But one thing we've talked about, and I think everybody was in favor of working on, was a second unit amnesty again. Another thing we've talked about that I think is part of what's in the general plan is to create some recognition of historic properties. And how do we go about preserving, doing some historical preservation in this town? Phil, at one point we had considered writing a density bonus law to help implement the state's density bonus law in a more focused way in Fairfax. That's something I think we could talk about. Another issue is the fact that decibel readings are taken from the property line of the complainer as opposed to this noise source. I think that's something we've talked about addressing. And Cindy asking about the sidewalk composition this morning reminded me at some meeting we were at about a complaint about the sidewalks on Bolinas not being of the right type of material, like some composite-based material. So again, that's more of a downtown design standard issue that I probably wouldn't put on the top of the priority list, but I'd keep it in there somewhere.
That's, thank you for that comment about the general plan. We should definitely tie back our lists with the general plan list before we do a full prioritization. One comment I'd have is that my paper happens to be sitting with the staff's list up. And looking at that, I see some
Good
intriguing...
night. Thank you for joining us.
I see some intriguing things that I haven't seen before that look like pretty easy things to do. And I'm assuming that staff, I would suppose Linda probably is the author of some of these thoughts on the staff's list. Some of these things might just be significant time savers for staff and maybe would be pretty easy to agree to, like allowing you to throw out old these fat piles of plans that have been sitting around forever because you have no statute of limitations on when you can throw them out. I could see that being a problem. You'd end up knee deep in old plans that are completely irrelevant and will definitely have to be reprinted if they ever get revived. So little things like that, if you wanted to put a few of those that would be really easy and probably not controversial for anybody and not very complicated all into one little bundle, and it would save you a lot of time. That could be a savings of time for the town. We talked several times tonight. All of us kept throwing in our comments, and I know I've done this with many applicants of things that I can't see making them conditions, like using LED lighting or using water heaters that, as Chair Fregoso said, would be either demand water heaters or, as I pointed out, heat pump water heaters, something like that, that there's just insulation. These are really the way, and then Phil talks about solar. So solar is kind of in a category by itself because you've got a lot of site considerations involved with it, and I know that would have to be tied in with there. But almost any old building in Fairfax could use some insulation, and it is just the most absolutely amazingly cost-effective and wonderful thing you can do to a building, except you can't normally do it just on any random day because you have to tear the walls apart and it gets really dusty and messy. So if you're doing any kind of construction, boy, I mean,
You can blow it in
do
now.
it. You can do it, yeah, but it's dusty. Yeah, but it leaves a dusty mess. And so, you kind of cover your furniture and move your stuff out and do it. It's worth doing. It's way worth doing, but it's even easier to do if you're already in a dusty situation because you're doing construction. So it's somehow tying that incredible opportunity to do some of those things with the fact that we are routinely talking with people who are undergoing construction. Kind of just a little bit different twist on the, it's kind of like the theory of one of the theories of planning seems to be that whenever, that we, as a government, we don't have the ability to just jump into somebody's face on any random day and tell them they have to go do something to their house unless it's so egregious that it's condemned. But other than that, we sort of leave people alone, except when they do a certain level of work, and then they have to come and apply for a permit, and that's when we say, aha, this house is now going to have sprinklers. The house next door, which could use sprinklers as well, is not going to get sprinklers because they haven't come in for an application. So that's sort of what continually happens. We hope that our housing stock will improve by sort of fits and starts as we get that opportunity to get an improvement in. And that can be a burden to applicants because, you know, if we pile so many of those on, then it ends up that you come out and you step into the daylight and you be legal about what you do, and suddenly you're just hammered with you're buying the fire hydrant for the neighborhood as well as doing a million other things that your neighbors didn't have to do. But some of these things, like putting insulation in, I mean, I just feel like it's a suggestion. I just want to tell people, please, you know, consider that. You'd be such a fool not to, you know, you'll love the fact that you did it later on. So it's sort of not so much a public safety issue or as it is just really directly a suggestion for the applicant. So I don't know, that's a passion of mine to try to figure out how we can get that stuff to happen. And
Well, some of
Can
those
I-
things, like the insulation, I mean, some of those things are going to be a requirement when you do remodels anyway, so, you know, yeah.
Yes.
So
I
that's
was,
already there.
yeah, I was just going to say that some of these are already required in California by the energy standards codes, and they really upped the ante this last cycle. The codes are updated every 3 years, and it's really difficult to comply with the energy standards for California without doing what you're suggesting, which is, it's great, and 10 more things. Actually, they're making it very difficult now to build something without these extras. So, I think.
Maybe we should start there
Mhm.
and doing a review.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. The mandatory measures, I'm sure you have. If not, I have them. I can distribute them because it's pretty, it's pretty steep, just in terms of what they're making people do these days, unfortunately. For some people, they can't afford to do it, so. But maybe that's a good place to start to see what we can take off the table here, because it's already required and governs anything that we may, put on there. So maybe we do a comparison of your ideas with what is required. Yeah.
Because I'm, I hear do something untoward and expense-wise. Going on these lists, though, a lot of these points, especially what they call Commissioner Green's list, I mean, I called together what I was remembering from hearings, but a lot of these things deal with hillside properties. Some of these things we've actually taken care of. So like 4 up on commission meetings idea, revisit the second unit ordinance. I mean, we kind of have that. We have the ADU from the state of California, and we've made it.
And the councils, you've reviewed it and
Right.
and the council's just been continuing it because they've just had too much to do. Eventually, we will have an ordinance that complies with state law.
I was wondering what happened to CH to CC too, but You know, that takes care of number 13 on my list, second-story living space. I mean, that whole process is going on that CH to CC. I think a lot of these things, you know, hillside properties, and I kind of bring this up every time we see one, and why we have to require a certain width to have a permit, which otherwise might have been over the counter. I'm kind of an over-the-counter guy. I mean, if we can make more permits OTC, all the better. Saves the town money, makes it easier for applicants, encourages people to apply. So that's kind of, you know, and I'd take number 6, required solar based on report, and move it up to number 1. That's just me. You know, and I think I totally agree with the idea that we need to revisit the general plan and see what is unimplemented and kind of move those things into position to implement. And I just remember being on the General Plan Implementation Committee and looking down that matrix, and almost every single item is Planning Commission's burden. So, you know, that's something where we need to get back into
I don't think I've ever seen that matrix.
the general plan. Oh, it's there. Bruce really.
Oh,
It's been really upgraded. Bruce did an electronic upgrade of it. It's searchable now and all
that
that.
would be a good way for us to begin.
So that matrix needs to be revisited. And then, you know, of all the staff's list on the other side of the page, include expiration time periods, that would be a great idea. I mean, I've heard, you know, friends of mine around Fairfax saying, you guys granted a permit to that house, but it's been 2 years, and they're just starting to pound nails, and, you know, we should do something about that issue, you know. And people who I know build their houses like a hobby, and so it takes sort of 2 or 3 years as the rooms start to slowly, as windows get put in, you know, 1 a month, and that kind of thing. It's just a little, I mean, to me, that's a little crazy. That a house could be a hobby. So it's and you know, all the things that have been said, I agree with. Mapping updates, we've got to have clear maps. They've got to be up to date. Noise ordinance, green building ordinance might take care of your whole thing, though. You know, green building ordinance. But it would be excellent to see a list of all the UBC requirements that are there. If you have that at your fingertips.
Yeah, I
So those are
wonder
my
if
comments.
if an intern could be found who could take the task of sort of pulling all that together.
Exactly, and that same intern could take all of these that don't have ordinance references and peg a number to each one of these items on both sides of the page. I mean, the staff one, of course, does have quite a few, but if we could peg each one of those, you know, if you've got a student or someone who just, you know, has nothing else to do, then we can have them take a look at that. And some of these issues may have gone away. I'm not sure quite what the Pastore Willow traffic thing was, but I think that'd be a great start to have some, you know, someone that really would get to know the ordinances too. I mean, what an exercise in learning that would be. If I had a student, I would give it to them.
Absolutely, yeah.
I have
I'm
taught-
not
I've taught
kidding.
college,
It's a very
and I know that's
timely
not a
issue,
fun
I would think.
exercise, but still.
It might be possible to find somebody who'd be actually interested in doing it.
So maybe we can just start with this list and kind of cleaning it up and adding some background to some of these things.
Well, I
the
don't
things
think,
that
I don't
we've
think there's a
taken off.
problem with with cleaning up the list, because there are things that are outdated. Sorry if I'm speaking over you, but I'd really like to hear your response to Ben's idea about doing this at a retreat, because I just don't see how you're really going to have time on your regular meetings with your applications to do this. So I kind of wanted to hear if everyone's willing to do something like that, if we can get a date.
Yeah, and I want to talk about a little bit more about that, because I think this is a multi-step process that not only involves our input, but involves the council's input. For example, I think that given some of the public expression relating to CC to CH, that's why we haven't heard much more about that. So I think that it would probably be a good idea to come up with a list, you know, some incredibly interested intern, however you come up with the list, but then to let the council weigh into it in terms of if they see something, they're like, no, don't even bother, then why would we waste our time trying to figure out how to prioritize that amongst the other issues?
Yeah, I agree with that too.
I think we don't do that until we've looked at a list and we've come up with things and we've cleaned this. I think that's our responsibility as a planning commission, to go through this and get it to where we think it's good. Because some of these things are, you know, things that don't have to go, wouldn't go to to the council. Others might, but I think our role is to massage the list and clean it and figure out what we see. And then look at that and say, okay, well, these are issues that, you know, may need some direction here before we proceed, but others are ones we could put together, and if we need to forward it up, we can do that. So I wouldn't go to the council for direction until we've done our work on it.
I think we should talk.
And the
I'm sorry.
retreat's fine.
I think we should talk about whether we want to maybe set up a subcommittee of ours, a couple of people to look at this and do that kind of clarification of what does that mean, and there's a lot of redundancy in here, kind of put them in some sort of order. I think the retreat is probably a good idea, and then if we have that list somewhat filtered through, we could look at that. I really love the idea of looking at that matrix for the general plan. I think that's critical. And rather than spending time really kind of delving into them much tonight, I'd like to maybe take a look at either a subcommittee, one or two of us who could maybe meet with staff and then talk about what might be a good time for a retreat. Also, frankly, we have two people running for council that may or may not impact who we wind up with on the planning commission. I think that we should talk about that when we get to our retreat and see how we plan to handle that.
Okay, so this retreat, it's in Kona? Is that the idea? I mean, I'm all for the retreat wherever it is, whatever time of year, but Kona is my suggestion.
Nice try.
If you've got a place in mind, I'm all ears now. Okay, thank you very much. Those were all great comments and feedback. And by the way, I was about to pick up the phone and talk to some mapping people today. I intend to make that a really high priority because, yeah, that's kind of a head scratcher. I mean, I'm not casting shadow on how it ended up that way, but it certainly, you know, it's one of those garbage in, garbage out. So we need to do that. Hopefully we don't run into a budget issue, but either way, we're going to make that happen. And, you know, to me, that's also something that ideally you get online. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be one of those look up your zoning type things, even though that's great too, because that just kind of facilitates people's understanding and interacting with the zoning ordinance. But just getting that fixed is definitely a really high priority, and I will be initiating work. And as pointed out, it's probably not something that needs to go to any committee or subcommittee or anything like that. It's just bottom line competency. Yeah, so work on that and the other items. I am aware of the general plan implementation committee. I haven't seen their specific work and, you know, how that shook out vis-a-vis a matrix, but I have seen the time periods and who's assigned things, so I'll be happy to look into that. And then with my fellow interns here, I'm just kidding. You know, some of these things we're kind of chomping at the bit with, so we would welcome, you know, the opportunity to pursue this further as we have time. And so let's just continue that discussion, and maybe the next planning commission meeting, I mean, or unless we want to follow up on the chair's suggestion tonight, and I mean, we could do it a couple different ways. We could wait until after the election results are in. I mean, I certainly would love to see planning commissioners graduate to the council. I think that's fabulous training for the important work that councils do. So, you know, onward and upward. Not that people who choose to continue to serve on the commission aren't doing incredibly important work too, but it's one of those things where—
Nice try. I wouldn't wait until the election. I would just keep moving on this.
Okay, well, given that this was a discussion, it was agendized, what I could probably, I'll work with the chair, and we'll sit down and have an idea. I think, you know, that an ad hoc committee of, say, two members of the commission, you're not going to run into, I don't believe, Brown Act problems, especially because it's strictly advisory, no decisions are made. Obviously, as pointed out, before you get too far into it, you're going to definitely want to loop back with the town council and kind of get their buy-in, or, you know, whatever takes place at their hearing in terms of feedback. But we'll continue that process.
Another thing that I think would be helpful is when we can have a sense of what's coming up for us in terms of projects that are being submitted, it could give us some idea of when we might have time. I know we've got the wall property coming back. I don't know what else is coming forward, that, you know, we could take a look at that scheduling and figure out what might be a good month to have some sort of retreat, and when and where that would be. And
well, at a minimum, I will come back for the next meeting with this as updated as we can, and try to organize it and well, not necessarily prioritize it, but get some of the background so that people can get an idea of where this loops into our ordinance and things like that.
So I think the retreat is a great idea. If we can schedule it, if we can figure out how to do it, I would love to be part of that. And specifically on the not only showing you, Ben, the matrix, but also just remembering ourselves what the status of it is. I actually wasn't on the GPIC all the way until the sunset of the GPIC. It has sunsetted now. So some more work was done on the matrix that was after the time that I left, because when I came on the Planning Commission, I needed to leave the GPIC. So I don't know whether either of the other two commissioners who were on the GPIC would be interested in working on this as well, but I think that Diane Causey we might be able to prevail upon her to spend an hour or so with you, and I would be happy to do that as well. She and I worked a lot on the matrix, and she worked on it the most after I left. She continued to work on it, so she's the last one who's touched it, and actually did make it more interactive and made it to where it did more tricks. So she would be the best one to show it to us if you wanted to do something like that. If anyone else would be interested in being part of that, if it was only two planning commissioners and Diane Causey, then it wouldn't be any kind of, well, maybe three would be, we could still do it under the Brown Act. It's less than a quorum. Only two, even though we have 7 members? It's less than a quorum? Okay, two members maximum.
Just one thing to keep in mind for a retreat is that between August and mid-November, I work on Saturdays, and I know lots of times Saturdays are the day that's set aside for that type of thing, so I work all the time, but Tuesdays and Saturdays I have 10-hour days.
I will, and I must say, I will not be here for the September meeting, and I won't be available from about September 10th through the end of the month.
So, go ahead.
Well, before we leave it, I just want to urge again to see if we can get someone to peg an ordinance to each one of these as possible, and then I totally agree with, we should go on to the minutes. Yes, thank you.
Well, we also have the planning director's report.
Okay, I'll be brief, although several times there were discussions that alluded to this. I went to a planning director and building officials meeting this week, and the topic was dealing with green building and green building checklists. And as Commissioner Gonzalez-Farber referred to, the state has adopted very stringent requirements, and they will continue to do so. In theory, by the next adoption, which is on a 3-year cycle, they will require for residences that are 4,000 square feet or larger to be zero net energy usage, which more or less mandates solar use to get to that point, or super insulated buildings. There's also, and that's the Cal Green Tier 1, and so there is a whole bunch of things that are rolling in, and I don't have a lot of background on those details yet, but I may refer to commissioners with more background. And also, I know that the sustainability and green team at the county, I know those people, they made a presentation at this planning director's luncheon. So I can definitely start doing some background on that. But suffice to say, and the general consensus among the planning directors is there's a whole bunch of stuff rolling down the turnpike that is, so when you look at other efforts that have occurred, for example, LEED for residences and things like that, I mean, one of the biggest challenges is consistency, especially if you're not just looking at large new homes, which statewide, that's a main concern. And, you know, obviously the environmental and sustainability elements in new construction is a big issue around the state. And then you come to Marin where it's, you know, 95% at least built out. And so now we're dealing with remodels and additions. And so one of the items that was discussed with the planning director is triggers. You know, when do you get to a demolition? And every jurisdiction has a different, you know, demolition definition. You know, what constitutes demolition, and then what percentage of a house before you get to triggers. So it's very intricate, and it's super challenging. And of course, we're trying to make it a little bit easier for contractors and people in the building community to make sense on a county-wide basis what the requirements are. And it's going to be a long road to get to that. But those are all items that are coming up. And so it's something where I was paying close attention, and with the commission's direction, I will continue to become more knowledgeable. And if it appears that bringing in some outside expertise, maybe for a discussion at some meeting, would be useful. I can tell just on the 2 meetings I've been here that there's really a lot of interest in trying to get those elements into residential projects, or any project that involves remodels, additions, especially brand new, to the extent that's feasible or reasonable. And of course, those are all questions that your commission and the town council will have to decide. So that was a good information on that. Other items, very quickly, the state has passed a statute that relates to electric vehicle charging stations. And in their inimitable style, they've said that you have to try to streamline it and allow them everywhere and things like that. But then they have these list of streamlining standards, and boy, the building official and I were looking at that going, that doesn't seem like you're streamlining it. So we're kind of looking at that. What will probably take place very quickly, likely at the September 6th Town Council meeting, is adoption of an electric vehicle charging ordinance change to the building standards, building and construction chapter in the municipal code, where it simply clarifies that you can do this via permit. Left unsaid is this notion that you can do this town-wide. And one of the things I would like to do is get that implemented, because the state really is saying you have to do that by September 3rd. But I'd like to come back to the commission with zoning code changes that clarify for both solar and EV charging stations, that they're allowed town-wide in virtually every zoning district. And I'd have to look if there was some that's like open space or something like that. But just to make it clear in our codes that, you know, by the way, this is by right, you know, permitted use, so you don't have to go through any discretionary review. We would reference the appropriate electrical codes or things like that. So that will be something that will loop back to the commission as we have the time to, you know, do the.
If we could not use the words by right,
Okay.
I think it would be helpful.
Okay.
It's a third rail in this town.
Isn't it the case that we already waive the permit fee for applying for a permit to put in an EV charging station?
Yeah, I'm not aware that we have any specific waivers at this time.
Oh, okay. Because there's a waiver for the permit fee for solar, right? And there's a waiver for the permit fee for double pane, upgrading from single pane to double pane windows. Is that correct? Or maybe a permit's not required
I
for
don't know
that?
about that. I know, the only one I know of is for solar,
Okay.
and the council made that decision
I
to
thought
waive
it
the
was
fees.
waived because when I put in our charging station,
Well, I might have
I
missed it,
thought we
but
didn't have to pay a fee for that. We had
Yeah,
the inspection before the work and after the work and everything, but it wasn't, I don't
I'm
know.
not seeing
Check
that
with
in a
Mark.
cursory review of
Okay.
the building code section.
I was mentioning to you, I think it was tonight, maybe it was last month, that we've been talking on the Climate Action Committee about we had a report from someone who was explaining to us that there are a number of houses around the area that have some very old and not very safe breaker panels, main distribution panels in their house that are not rated for the kind of amperage that's very common with modern houses. So, and they just are fire hazards in any case. And so anything that we could look at to, again, it's just a matter of really helping the people who have the house to, for one thing, avoid their house burning down, and for another thing, avoid getting into a situation where as things move toward electric, which is in the long term, this is the direction that things go, as we get off of fossil fuels, we'll quit using gas burning appliances and we'll use electric appliances instead. A lot of them will be really efficient because heat pumps, for example, don't use nearly as much electricity as an actual resistance heater. So the sort of old all-electric home idea is now much upgraded with the notion of heat pumps. But as we move toward electric, and then we've also got solar, we've also got electric vehicles, there's a lot more electric draw on a house. And so looking at these really antiquated panels and making sure that people aren't just tacking things on one by one. Of course, if they do that by permit, that will be seen. I imagine that, that there's not enough capacity in the house to do it, but sometimes people just plug more and more things in, and it doesn't even trigger an inspection, and, you know, it ends up being a real danger. So we weren't sure. We have met with Mark Lockaby, a couple of us from the Planning Commission, and some about these consensus that we ought to try to figure out how to do something about them, but we weren't quite sure how. So just raising that for everybody's consideration.
Well, I was on the downtown San Rafael board for years during the vision and the rezoning and the making of over-the-counter permits more so that building owners in downtown San Rafael would be encouraged to, you know, upgrade their buildings. And one of the features that we did to help owners, many of whom were elderly, was to convince banks, I'm not even quite sure how the exact way this was done, to convince banks to provide lower interest loans for certain kinds of building permits. If we can get relationships like that together to help people, I mean, we can ordinance the heck out of the town, and whether people were going to comply is going to be an economic question, and maybe they even want to, but they can't afford it. So that's something we could look into as to how we might be able to get some low interest loans for certain folks who, you know, have certain economy that but their house requires an upgrade of the electrical panel, et cetera. So just throwing that out as another idea. It was done in San Rafael, and we're a little smaller here, but we might be able to do something like that, who knows?
Okay. Minutes.
I take it you were done?
Excuse me?
You were done?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thanks.
On page 3, excellent minutes, by the way. On page 3, the fourth paragraph, where at the end of that line it says Mr. Green. I don't believe that was Mr. Green, Commissioner Green. That was Ms. Green, the applicant.
That's true.
That was confusing.
I have a couple of points, not much. In page 3 at the bottom, Commissioner Green provided the following comments. The last one, the applicants, not they applicants. It's not a big deal, but and these minutes are excellent, by the way. They're getting better and better. Yeah, that's all the comments I had. Thanks.
Wow, they're good minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed? Think that'll work better?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Don't
I
we
was
all?
going to say nay.
Aye.
Oh, okay. Aye.